Good morning, everyone. Let's start in a minute. Today is going to be your last lecture for social issues and justice, and we will conclude the entire discussion today. So please let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so yesterday we had discussed civil society, role of civil society, how civil society aids in development. So what we have done in social justice so far is we have looked at two sectors, that is one of health and education, and also we have discussed hunger. And everywhere we are looking into in what way has the government intervened. Now in this chapter, what we have to do is first thing is we have to understand that what are these vulnerable sections, and then try to analyze the policies, programs of the government. And generally, the question that is asked is going to be specific. They'll take up a particular scheme and they'll ask a question on that. But at times, when they ask a question on implementation of a policy, we find that we might not have sufficient content. We might not be aware of all the programs under a policy. So if this is a policy, you have various programs under it. So your national health policy, for that matter, has your Ayushman Bharat health and wellness care centers. Then you have Jan Arogya Yojana, etc. So multiple programs are there, and at times it becomes difficult to move on to understand all the policies at once, like what is going on with the implementation. So what we'll do is we'll try to understand the basics of policy framework, how a policy has to be analyzed, what are the various stages in creation of a policy, how to implement it, what are the issues related to implementation, and we'll understand thereby how to go about, how to approach these topics. Now, if you look at a policy, let's look at the stages first. What are the various stages in policy process? So the first idea is conceptualizing the policy, creating a design of the policy. Then comes the implementation part. And finally, we look at the outcomes and we try to evaluate the entire process. That what were the lacunas, whether it was implemented properly or not, whether we have achieved the desired outcomes or not. So the final stage is evaluation. Now look at the process. The first thing that we do is we identify the problem. Then we determine what have to be the objectives. First is, if you look at health, we identify what is the problem. The problem is lack of infrastructure. The problem is issue with affordability. Then we move on to determine the objectives. What are the objectives? Achieve quality healthcare for all. Achieve access, quality, and affordability together. That is universal health coverage. Then we look at how can we do it. What can be the various ways in which this objective can be achieved. And ultimately, looking at those various options that we have, we select the policy. And then we start with the implementation process. Once we select the policy, we will design the programs. In what way the entire policy has to be implemented. What have to be the specific programs under this policy. And then with implementation, during implementation, we go on monitoring that. That means we look at whether the program is able to achieve the desired objectives or not. What are the problems with the program so that we can correct our course. If we are going in this direction and we feel that there is a gap, there is a problem, so that we can correct our course accordingly. And finally, we look at the outcomes and ultimately evaluate the policy. And we'll come to these one by one. We look at all these aspects. But before that, understand what is policy analysis. Because through the process, we'll be using this term and we'll be using this process. So policy analysis is basically looking at the data and trying to figure out what are the problems. What are the consequences of the policies in the past? What can be the outcomes of these alternates? So we said we determine the alternatives to approach this policy. That this is the way in which we are going to move ahead. So with policy analysis, we use data-based technique to find out what can be the outcomes. Also, we look into the past. So with policy analysis, we look into the past and we look into the future with data. So when we were saying that we have to determine the problems, what are the problems in a particular sector? So say healthcare. How do we find out what are the problems? We need data from the previous policy, that what were the problems during the implementation. We need data from various surveys. And then we have to finalize that what is the problem, what is the actual problem which has to be fixed. So we look in the past with policy analysis. Then we also try to project. We choose various alternatives, that this is the way in which we can proceed. And then we also try to look into the future through data. So it has to be forecasted, that what will be the possible outcome, how things will change. Because theoretically, it is easy to say that, okay, let's see, if we go for creating health and wellness care centers, we will be able to achieve objective. But how do we know? How can we be sure? We'll take up the previous policy, we look at what was the course of action there, we take up the data and we try to analyze whether this direction in which we are moving will be right or not. This is basically policy analysis, wherein we analyze various aspects of a policy, what can be the consequences, what has been the thing in the past through data. So the idea is data-based analysis. Now, before we move on to the various stages of policy making, let's find out what are the basic determinants to this framework. Because the first thing is we have to identify the needs and the demands. That we look into what can be the possible needs and also demands. And it is very obvious that the needs will take priority, because need is something that is urgent, that is important. And then only thereafter we have demand, which says that yes, this is also desirable. So the first idea is look at the need. So if you take up your health policy, you'd say that we need affordable and quality healthcare. Then you start thinking about what can be the various inputs. How can we achieve that? So one idea is from your health policy that let's invest more in public healthcare, because if you invest in public healthcare, you can provide cheap and rather free healthcare to people. So the input is free, or the input is public increase in public healthcare expenditure. Then you think about the process. So yes, you are putting in money, but where do you want to actually put it? Where do you want to invest it? Yes, you have added money to the public pool, that we are going to utilize this money. Then we decide on the process. That what has to be the process? It can be, let's use this money to establish health and wellness centers. Then we look into what will be the output and outcome. And if you remember from our previous discussion, we were saying that output is the result, what is happening. And outcome is basically what happens to the targeted group. So we were saying that we have to improve the quality of healthcare and thereby finally achieve universal health coverage, free healthcare for all. And outcome is basically what happens to the targeted group. Yes, you can achieve free healthcare for all, but what will be the ultimate outcome? That everyone gets this healthcare and they have better quality of life. They have better standard of living with this healthcare. So when you look at the basis to framework, you first identify the needs and demands, then you select the inputs and the process, what has to be the process, and then finally you look into output and outcomes. That what has been the output. We invested money in health and wellness centers, thereby we have achieved universal health coverage. But what is the outcome? Because universal health coverage does not necessarily mean that it will translate into better quality or better standard of life for everyone. So do remember that there's a difference between output and outcome, and it has been highlighted previously because it is going to come in a further discussion. Now let's see what has to be done with respect to these stages. What we'll do is we'll take up all these stages one by one and try to identify what can be the problem at every stage. Because the question is generally directed either towards design or implementation. And also a question can be asked covering both design and implementation. So what we'll do is what has to be done in this process, say the process of problem identification, and what can be the problem. So we are going to highlight the problems then and there itself, so that when we come to the suggestions, how to make a policy successful, you already have the answer. Looking at the problems, you'll already have the answer. And it is important to identify problems at each step so that the structure is there in the mind. Because by now, a few of you might have already internalized the structure, that yes, this is how we proceed. So outcome is not the quality that you are providing. The quality that you are providing, the cheap healthcare you are providing, is the output. Outcome is what happens to the targeted group. The targeted group, say, is the poorer section. What happens to them? What is the outcome? So output is basically what has happened. And outcome is what is its impact on the targeted group. So there is a difference, slight difference. So let's start with the first stage. So the first stage is let's identify the problem so that we can decide what has to be the objective which we need to achieve. So in the process of identification, the first thing is that you need data. You need data to find out what is the actual problem. So for instance, if you look at your national education policy, it says that a lot of students are not enrolling. The gross enrollment ratio is low. The attendance is low. The dropout rates are high. And we say that the quality of our education is not good. So in this process of identifying the problem, we look into data and we find out what is the problem. Now, what can be the possible problems here? What can be the problems with respect to problem identification? What can be the issues? If you're using data, what is the problem there? Can someone think about it? Because this is something we have discussed previously. Now we are just giving it a structure. So yes, data insufficiency can be a problem. Yes, so data may not be representative, so you can say data might be insufficient. The data that is available is not proper, it's incomplete, it can be partial. Then while identifying, yes, so Starlee has identified the right thing. So when we're identifying the problem, one issue that we can face is that of data insufficiency. Then the part is how do we interpret the data? So there can be problem with data interpretation. Yes, so data insufficiency can be, think about your sample surveys. Now the data that we get from there is not representative of the entire population, one. Then similarly, if you look at those data from various organizations, so your statistical institute will come up with a different data. Then your National Family and Health Survey will come up with a different data. So there is a problem with the data being not similar. The problem being the data that we are getting from various organizations have differences. So another problem can be differences with respect to the data. So yes, so data on same variables is different from different agencies. Yes, so also you can find that different departments might use different parameters. So think of poverty calculation. For poverty, right now we are moving towards multidimensional poverty index, but otherwise you find that the metric that is being used everywhere is different. So there are irregularities with respect to data. The basic ground on which you have to interpret the data is not common. So again, method with respect to data, the method that you have used in data collection. So whether you have gone for a complete census or you have gone for a sample survey, what is the size of the sample? If you remember from Global Hunger Index, you would remember that we are saying to find out the levels of malnutrition in general population, there was a survey which included only 3,000 people, and there was a questionnaire which would also be questioned, right? So the method which is used to collect this data. So let's think about this. At the very first stage, before we identify the problem, the data that we are using, we can have problems with that. Then in the process of identifying, there can be problem with respect to data interpretation. The method that you can use might not be correct. So these can be the problems right at the first step. And I hope you're getting an idea how you can fix this problem. Moving on to the next stage, which talks about determining the objective. Now if we say that the data that you have used is insufficient, the data that you have used has gaps, the method that you have used to interpret the data is not right, then do you think we'll be able to determine the objective correctly? Because there might be a problem with affordability and we might think that access is the problem. There might be a problem with the quality of education and we might think that it is not quality, but the number of teachers which have to be increased. So determining the objective will also face a similar hurdle. And also when we go on determining these objectives, they are very subjective. Even though we are saying that these are objectives that we wish to achieve in the future, but they can be very subjective. Priorities generally will be laid down by the government. They might not even have affordability in the list of priority. So the problem at the first stage is determining the objective. That with the data that we have, are we determining the right objective or not? Then you think about the next stage first. The next stage is going for various alternates. But what if in the process we lose the sight of the objective? The objective that was to be achieved was affordability, but in the process we have forgotten that. We have left the objective behind and we are following some other goal. So losing sight of the objective. So let me repeat. We have to first identify the problem. Now to identify the problem, we need data. We need data from various organizations, from various surveys, from census. Now there can be data insufficiency, there can be irregularities and gaps related to data from various organizations. The interpretation of data might not be right. The method that you're using to interpret the data might not be in place. And also, then you find if you go on determining the objective with this flawed data, you might end up choosing or going for wrong objective. And then also, in the process of policy formulation, you might lose the sight of objective. And it is not just limited to policy formulation. It also extends to policy implementation, that the various programs that you're coming up with might not be in line with the objective. So I hope the first stage is clear. So first two stages are clear. Now the second stage is, we have, say, till here, now we take the ideal situation that we have determined the correct objective. There's no problem with respect to the objective. The objective that we have selected is perfect. Now we have to think about what can be the various ways in which we can achieve this objective. So the objective being affordability. If you want to think about affordability, you can think of increasing the public expenditure. Then you can also think of having more stringent regulation of the private sector. So these can be two different courses. Also think about any other case. If you want to improve the quality of education, you might think that if we make students enroll in the classroom, we can make the quality of our education better. Then you might think that if we spend enough on teacher training, if we come up with better assessment process for teachers, we can fix this problem of quality. So you can have multiple alternates. Now also, I would like to tell you one thing, that any policy, if you have care to look at your national health policy and your national education policy, or any program for that matter, they have multiple objectives. So they might have objective of affordability and access at the same time. So they will have multiple objectives and they'll have multiple courses. But for the sake of simplicity, what we are doing is we are thinking of the objective as singular, that this is the ultimate objective. This is what we want to achieve. But there can be multiple. And if you have looked at your documents of health and education policy, you would be able to realize that yes, there are multiple objectives mentioned there. So again, just for the sake of our simplicity and ease of discussion. So now you're thinking about various alternates, that I can, whether to take path A or to take path B. Now what do you think can be the issues here in choosing these alternatives? In choosing these alternatives, what can be the problem? Yes, so the idea of subjectivity in selection. Now, ultimately, it is up to, while determining the alternatives, it is up to your political system or your or the one involved in this planning, in this process of policy formulation, that what do they deem fit? What do they think is the right way? And now again, if you, I just want to make clear, in the context of India, generally we think that the laws are made in the legislature. Yes, they are. But generally, the policy come from various ministries, come from the executive. There is a dedicated team of your bureaucrats working on this policy formulation. So generally, it is the executive which brings in, through the ministers, brings in these policies. And ultimately, legislature discusses these issues in the parliament. They have an open discussion. And you would find that more often than not, those discussions are very general. So just keep that in mind, that this is not happening. This policy analysis is not happening in the parliament. This policy analysis is happening in the back end. And it is only the discussion that goes on happening in the legislature. Okay, so just think about this, subjectivity in selection. So there can be your policymakers who might think that yes, this is the objective, and what they feel is that increasing the public expenditure, public health expenditure, for instance, can be the right solution, can be the perfect solution. But also generally you'll find that the governments will try to stay away from expenditure. They'll try to regulate their own expenditure and try to rope in your public sector. So it is completely on the discretion of your policy analysts that what different courses of action do they choose. So think about someone who is not able, who has not worked in the sector. They might not be able to identify the problem correctly, they might not be able to identify the objectives correctly, and they also might not be able to determine what kind of alternatives you have to take. And ultimately, in determining these policy alternatives, your inherent bias will also come into the picture, will also come to the forefront. So the subjectivity that you have in selection, because the simple idea is the next stage has to be basically forecasting these policy alternatives, trying to figure out what can be right, what can go wrong, etc. So, but if the stage before that, at the stage before that, they might not even consider a very good alternative for that matter. They might limit their scope in determining the policy alternatives. So, what is this policy alternative? That to achieve the objective, what is the way that we can take? Whether to take path A, B, C, D, E, which path do we need to take? The next stage after that is we take up these alternates. Yes, so ideology of the political class, etc., will reflect in determining these policies. But ultimately, you would see that this bias will reflect more in evaluating and finalizing the policy. That this is the direction in which we want to move, and we'll come to that. Now we have taken up multiple alternatives. Out of these alternatives, what we have to do is first we try to evaluate each alternate. We take a first alternate of increasing public healthcare expenditure, and what we do is we look into the data from the past. Let's say we have used that alternative in the past, and what we do is we look into the efficiency of it, whether it was efficient or not, whether it was suitable to ultimately achieve the objective or not. And also what we do is we look into the past, but also at the same time, what we do is we forecast, because a lot of things are changing. So yes, we might increase the expenditure in public healthcare, but at the pace at which our population is growing, it might become impossible for us to maintain that expenditure because it would have to increase proportionally. Then they think about private sector. That yes, we can give a push to private sector. Say the second alternative is giving a push to private sector. So yes, we might give a push to private sector, but private sector ultimately works on market norms. And over the years, those can actually say monopolize the entire market. There can be various problems with respect to privatization. So they will basically look into the past experience of the previous policy, and then they also try to forecast what can be the possible consequences of this of a particular path that they have chosen. Now again, you remember we always say that policy making is a process. It does not stop. It does not end after implementation. So after implementation, we basically evaluate it, and out of that evaluation, those inputs will go into formulating a new policy. So with this policy cycle will go on forever. There will be changes made during implementation. There will be changes made after evaluating a particular policy. But this process of policy analysis will keep going on. So now, can you think of the issues here? What can be the issues in evaluating the alternatives? What can be the issues here? Just think about the one thing is think about the first thing is if you want to forecast and if you want to also analyze, we cannot explicitly mention expertise here. The reason is if you think of expertise, now expertise is required at every stage. So we cannot say that yes, expertise was there till previous stage, but they do not have it here. So expertise has to be there throughout the process, and that's why we do not do it in the parliament. It is done in the back end. It is in the parliament. We just discuss it, debate it, so that there is consensus on these policy objectives, on the various programs and the policies. Okay, so just think about it. Now again, to look at the past and the future that we have to do, the policy analysis that we have to do, we will need data. So problem related to the similar problem related to data insufficiency, etc. here. Now also think about this. The subjectivity or the bias will also come into picture, because what happens generally? Think on a personal level. What happens is we think that something is right, and we try to look into only the positives of it. And at times we think that this kind of thing is wrong. This is something we should not engage into. And what we do is we look into the negatives only. So that bias can also work here in evaluating the alternatives. So while evaluating, your subjectivity and rather your bias might reflect in this evaluation. So you might feel that, okay, this can be, because everyone has that. We already have the answer in our heads. And all we try to do is legitimize it. So this bias can also play a role here. That we might think that this is right, and we will go on trying to prove that it is right. So this evaluation of alternatives, which has to take up both the forecast and the past experiences, might have problems with respect to data, might have problem with respect to the bias, the inherent bias that a person has. Now during this evaluation, you go for a cost-benefit analysis as well. The cost-benefit analysis need not necessarily be, say, only in economic terms. It can be if we go with this objective, if we go with this path, if we go with this alternative, it might take us 10 years to achieve the goal. So we might need X amount, but it will take us Y years to achieve the goal. But with the other option, it might take us 2X resources, but it will take us Y by 3 years to achieve those objectives. Now you have to see, they have to strike a balance. Which way is the right? What should be the ideal situation? Because if you go by adding 2X resources, then you might question, do at all have those kind of resources? Yes, if we pump in a lot of money, rather than going for 6%, we go for 12% of the GDP. But do we have that kind of resources? Wouldn't it, say, sideline other priority sectors apart from the sector that we are talking about? Yes, we might achieve goals in 1/3 of the time. So you have to go for a cost-benefit analysis. And it need not only be financial. You have to see that how long does it take, how effective and efficient a particular alternative will be. Yes, so when we think something is correct, we try to overlook the inefficiencies or the problems with respect to that alternative. Yes, so regional challenges based on demographic and geography. So again, yes, absolutely. You have to see that the policy will apply uniformly to the entire country, but you have regional variations. But what happens generally is the policy framework, because we have to choose the common problems, and that's the process of determining the objective. You have to see what are the common problems throughout the country which need to be addressed. And yes, look, the problems that are not being covered in the overall policy framework will be taken up by your states. So here it would not matter so much because we have already determined the objective. We already know what has to be achieved. And again, when we're talking about policy framework, you're going to have various programs in it. Right now, we see that most of our programs apply uniformly to the entire nation, irrespective of the regional differences, disparities. But more and more, we are moving towards equity-based model. That means if there's a district which needs more of a push towards affordability because they already have achieved access, so we go behind that with your specific programs. Okay. So think about multiple alternatives that you have and how you can achieve those alternatives and what path you have to take. What alternative are you going to choose from that? For which you would have to look into the past data, your past experiences, lessons from your previous policy, etc. Lessons from, say, France. That France invested this much money into this thing. France took this path and they achieved this goal. So we have to see that if we apply the same policy here with the regional variations, with the national variations that we have, would it be effective or not? So in this evaluation process, we look at both the efficiency and the effectiveness of various alternatives. Now, moving on to the next stage. After the evaluation, we have forecasted that, okay, path A is going to be the perfect way out. And then we finally select the policy that we are going to take this path A and in what way we have to move ahead. Because right now we have thought of the alternative that we are going to take. Now we have to finalize the proper framework inside it. We have to finalize the design of that alternative. And in that process, we will try to look into what will be the, because we have already analyzed the possible outcomes, etc. And we have to see that what will be the most effective way. So whether it will be pushed towards private sector or it will be increased public expenditure. So say we go with increase in public expenditure. Now with public expenditure, we have to find that where all that money goes. If we put, because inside that course of action that we have chosen, the course of action that we have chosen, it has multiple things. So we have to choose that, okay, let's invest in health and wellness centers, for instance. Let's invest in, making it more accessible to the elderly. So we finally select the policy. Now again, this policy selection can also have issues. The final policy that you select can also have issues. So rather than being focused on the outcomes, it can be merely focused on inputs. Because here we are also talking about the inputs that we are going to give. And if you have forgotten, remember the inputs were in what direction we have to invest. And the outcome was what will happen to the targeted group of any policy. Because remember, we are talking about vulnerable sections. So there can be policies about disabled, can be about transgenders, can be about scheduled tribes, can be about women. Again, this policy can also be sector specific. Why are we taking sector specific examples? Because that is something we have already gone through. And what I mentioned yesterday was, if you look at the various provisions of a policy, yes, you can definitely identify the problems. Because that becomes simple. You just look at it, you think about what can be the possible problems, and you're ready with critical analysis. And I hope that most of you will be in a position to critically analyze any kind of provisions now. Because we have done it to multiple things. We have done it to multiple policies. We have done it in multiple dimensions, for that matter. Now, another idea is that they might ask you about implementation, and particularly the problem might be with implementation, or the problem might be with a policy that you are not aware, but it generally won't be the case. You at least would have an idea about that particular program and policy that they have asked. But think of a situation where you do not know. How do you go about it? This is the way you go about it, because you would know that there'll be always gaps related to data. There'll always be a lot of subjectivity, a lot of biases involved. The objectives that we might choose might not be correct. And then similarly, we'll have the basic rules, the general rules with respect to implementation. Coming back to our policy selection. So in the next step, what we do is we choose the perfect course of action. We have already looked into the kind of alternatives that we have. But again, this selection process can also be complex, because now you have to finalize the design here. You have to finalize the design of the policy. And by finalizing the design, the focus has to be on outcome. The focus has to be what will happen to the targeted group. Now, what do you suggest can be the problems here? What do you think can be the problems in finalizing this design of our policy? Outcome and output. Think of education. Think of this class that is happening right now. The output is, if you think in terms of output, you might say that, yes, I'm attending the class regularly. The input was digital mode, creating digital infrastructure. We ensured that you attend class regularly. The time is of your convenience and you're attending the class regularly. So your input is laying down this digital infrastructure. Output is you're attending the class regularly. Outcome is, what are you actually learning? Are you even learning anything? Or is it that you're merely sitting in the class and not able to understand anything? So the outcome is basically what happens to the targeted group. You are the targeted group for whom the education has been made accessible and affordable. So now you can sit at home and study with this digital infrastructure. The output is you're attending the class regularly, it is cheap. But the outcome is what happens to you, whether you learn anything or not. Okay, so just think about this. Now we are going to finalize the design. Now what happens is, at this stage, think of a draft bill in your parliament. Now the draft bill is there, and your legislators are going to have a discussion, a detailed discussion on various aspects. And now think about the problems that might happen there. Think of, so you're asking that a policy is based on the final outcome rather than the output. Absolutely yes, because if you look at the policy document, if you go through the objective, you'll find them more focused towards outcome. They're more focused towards outcome. So they are talking about improving the quality of life, or improving the quality of services, improving the quality of your say citizenry, improving the quality of life of weaker sections. For instance, what is that outcome? The focus on outcome. See, whatever we have discussed is mentioned in the PPT. Whatever we have discussed is mentioned in the PPT, and these problems and the solutions have also been identified at the end. So okay, let's think about this. Yes, everything till the selection phase is done. Now we have to finalize the design. Now to finalize the design, you would have to look into various aspects. That if we go in this way, what will happen to the stakeholders? Just think about your national education policy, which was discussed and debated. And to see that for each and every dimension, even we did the same, that we looked into what can be the problems. So if we go for internationalization, what will be the problems related to that? How will various stakeholders, like your existing domestic universities and colleges, take it? If you change the entire structure, if you overhaul the entire structure of education, how would the targeted group, that is students, take it? How do the other stakeholders, like parents, schools, colleges, universities, take it? So you have to look into that, and that is generally what is discussed in the parliament. Then yes, there can be issue with respect to, because parliament should ideally be a place where you actually debate and discuss these issues and come up with something better. So if you find that, yes, something better can be done, you go with that. But generally what happens is, the majority party or the party in power, it is entirely up to their understanding, it is entirely on their whims and fancies that the policy will be selected, will be finalized. That yes, they will discuss and debate, but ultimately they would not make any kind of change. And this is what happens. So they stick to the agenda that they have already decided on. So it is not that the issues related to each and every stakeholder are taken into account. Then again, during this design, remember our first point, during this design, when we are finalizing the design, we might forget about or lose sight of the objective. That what was the ultimate objective that we want to achieve. We might choose a very impractical path that would not bear fruit. But this problem has already happened at the end of evaluation. That while evaluating these various alternatives before selection, you might have already chosen something which is impractical, which is not feasible to be taken up. So finally, you find that our policy design is complete. We have designed the policy. Now what we have to do is, during the implementation phase, you'll find that they come up with various programs. So if anyone has gone through your say national health policy or national education policy, they have highlighted the problems. They have given their suggestions that what can be done, what should be the course of action, but they do not finalize on the programs. That comes much later. That comes during the implementation phase. So yes, promote various global organizations or institutions to set up their institutions, campuses here in India. But they do not decide the exact rules that should be there. What has to be the regulation? How is it that we are going to achieve it? They might have targets. They might quantify the targets that, okay, let's say by 2030, we should have at least 5 global good universities here in India. But the final details of this, the final aspect has to come with implementation. So this design does not stop here. Yes, we have designed and formulated the policy, it has been finalized. But the design has to also be looked into during your implementation phase. Getting back to our initial part, what we did was we identified the problem. We thought of objective, what has to be the objective. Then we thought of what can be the various courses of action. Then we started evaluating those courses, that which will be the right fit for us. And then we finally finalize the design. We select the policy that this is the way in which we are going to proceed. Now what we have to do is we have to implement it. We have to finalize the design of various programs within it. So we say people should have to make health affordable. People should have insurance. Now we'll come up with Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana during the implementation phase. We'll finalize the basic plans, basic design of that scheme. So let's come to the implementation phase. Yes, so okay, so this question has been addressed with respect to outcome and output. And you keep asking question because at times you might not be able to connect with something that is being discussed here. So ultimate objective is outcome, which is calculated through various outputs. That if we achieve this, if we invest in this, if we achieve this, the outcomes will be better. So the policy generally you'll find is more philosophical for that matter. The objectives to a great extent are more philosophical. And if you look at the objectives, and I've shown you the objectives, they look like something very vague, right? They're not very specific. Because specific things are goals which you have to achieve. Objectives are not specific. Objective is the general direction in which you have to move. Okay, coming to the implementation part. Now, remember that question we were saying that a policy is as good as its implementation. A policy is as good as its implementation, and we had to discuss that in context of the national health policy. And there also I had highlighted that you might not know what is happening with respect to implementation. You might not have knowledge of every factual detail for that matter. Then how do you go about that question? And you'll get your answer here. But now let's think about that question once. So when we say a policy is as good as its implementation, don't you think we have overlooked the flaws that can happen during the designing stage, right? So a policy cannot be said to be only limited to implementation. The design has to be perfect, the implementation has to be perfect, the evaluation, the monitoring that is happening during implementation has to be perfect, and then we can say yes, we are in the direction of achieving the desired objectives. So if you approach that question, let's go back to the question. If you approach that question, what is the introduction? We have already finished design, and let's look into that question once. So the question was saying a policy is as good as implementation, and we had to critically analyze your national health policy in the light of this statement. Now, the first thing, what do you think is the first idea is that let's have an intro, then body, and then conclusion. Now, the thing is, we have to critically analyze the national health policy, and we have to stick to the national health policy. But think about just the statement. Forget about national health policy. Just think about this statement. A policy is as good as its implementation, because they might not ask you to critically analyze the policy. They might say use suitable examples to illustrate the same. Right. Now, the statement tries to say that implementation is the most critical part, and it is implementation which will decide whether we will be able to achieve the desired outcomes or not, whether the policy that we had formulated is good or not. So by our discussion so far, you would understand that no, it is not just implementation, but the design also matters. So design has not to be sidelined, not to be forgotten. We have to keep the design in as a part of the discussion. So think about a possible introduction to this. Now, there can be various ways. You can give an example wherein the policy design was very good, but because the implementation was not proper, the policy failed. But other ways, think about it, that you also try to highlight how design is also very significant. How if there is a problem at the designing stage, it would not lead to the desired objectives. The policy will still be not good, and it would not matter how perfectly you implement it. If the direction is not right, you're not going to achieve the goal. So think about this. A policy has a design flaw. Say at the policy, at the alternative determination stage, that the course of action that we have chosen is not correct. Now we finalize that course of action and we start implementing it. Now think about it. If we implement this particular course of action perfectly, would we be able to achieve the desired outcomes? Would we be able to achieve the desired outcomes? So yes, most of you are saying no, we will not be able to achieve the desired objectives if there is a flaw in the design. And we'll get back to this question. Just think about it, that in the introduction, you can also mention that design is also significant. This is just to give you an idea that how you approach these kind of questions. Then ultimately in conclusion, you already know you have to come up with various suggestions that how we can make a policy good. How can we make the policy perfect? And in the body, we have to stick to the problems that can arise out of implementation of a policy. Okay, let's move ahead. We'll come back to the question and we will complete the answer for that matter. Let's come to the implementation stage. Now, we say that for a policy to be successful, the implementation has to be right. The implementation has to be good. Now, what do we do during this implementation stage? We have policy objectives that we have to achieve. We already know the course of action. What we have to do is we have to finalize the basic programs. That how does it happen on the ground? How is it implemented on the ground? So think about design of your various programs. So the government will say that okay, we are starting this program for the weaker sections, for their health, for instance, under the overall policy framework of your national health policy. Now they have to finalize the design as to how we are going to go about it. What should be the pointers in the program? What should be the provisions of the program to achieve the desired outcomes? So what is the basic need here? So first thing is to start any program, to achieve success in any program, one thing is you need resources. You need both human resources and financial resources. So that is first requirement. Then also, the ones who are implementing it should be capable, should be skilled. There should be capability in our administrative system. That the ones who are implementing, they should be capable to implement it properly. Then also, you need support from all the arms of the government. You need support from the legislature, because it is ultimately the executive who's doing it, who's doing the task. So you definitely need support from your high command. So think of a bureaucrat who is going on implementing a particular program in a particular region. They will definitely need, say, support from the executive, from the state level and central level executive. Then also they need support from legislature. Because just think about the discussions that go on in a parliament, right? So now we have selected the policy. We have selected the policy framework. Now we have to discuss and debate various programs and course of action in the parliament. If we do not get support from the legislature, if there is always a say, hung assembly, if they're not able to finalize the fine print of these programs, then your implementation will lag behind. So you need support from there. And also, because judiciary also intervenes in form of, say, your judicial review, that they might feel that something is not right. And they will go on changing it. They'll go for judicial review and they'll ask the legislature to make changes accordingly. So you need support from the judiciary as well. It should not become an obstruction. It should not become an obstacle in implementing the policy. So you need three basic things. One is support from various arms of the government. Second is you need sufficient financial and human resources, and those human resources have to be capable. Now, you can already think about what can be the problems here. What can be the problems with respect to basics? Yes, judicial activism. Yes, judicial activism. So what can be the problems here? Not having educated personnel and finances can be a problem. Then your administrative capability can be under question. Then there can be problems with respect to all the three arms of the government. So right at the minimum requirement stage, you can highlight the problems. Yeah, so they might not be capable, they might not feel like doing it, they might not desire to work. There can be various forms of corruption. Center might not be giving funds in a timely manner. There can be lack of funds at the first place, in the first place. Yes, also there can be problem with respect to your civil society at large. There can be pressure groups for working opposite to the implementation of those programs. Then also you can think of your citizens coming up in protest. So that basically forms civil society. So yes, there can be problems right at the minimum requirement stage. And what you have to do is you have to look at what is it that we need to make a policy successful. What is it that we need to make a policy successful? But the way we have highlighted the issues there, right at the minimum requirement stage, let's see what can be the problems at the implementation stage. So that was the basic minimum requirement. That is the basic minimum requirement that we need. So the way we are talking about protest from by the civil society, or say the stakeholders not understanding the importance of it, or maybe protesting against it, will come at this stage. So there, at the minimum requirement stage, you look at the problems with minimum requirements. Then you think of doing the implementation phase. There can be protests by the stakeholders. Then also at times we'll find lack of awareness in stakeholders. One is because of this lack of awareness, they might feel that this is something which will work to our detriment and they go on protesting it. And that at times they might not even be aware that this is something meant for us, this is something meant for our benefit. So they might not be aware of the various programs that are happening. And you find that whenever there is a survey and people are asked, and if you remember that there was a survey, whether people are aware about Manrega or not. So a lot of rural people are not even aware that this kind of scheme exists. This is a program that exists. Then also, from the people perspective, people might not participate. Because public participation is a must for any policy to succeed, any policy to be implemented properly. And people might not take part in it. Then you are also suggesting other things. Yes, there can be corruption at the administrative level. Politicization of people's sentiments. Okay, so right now we have looked at from the public perspective what happens to the targeted group. What can be the problems with respect to the targeted group? But there can be problems with the administration, with the implementers. So one problem can be they are not capable. One problem can be that they are not capable. Do not worry, you will find everything here in the write-up. Do not worry about writing. So one idea is your implementers are not capable. Then second thing is, because of the political pressure, they are not able to work properly. They have a lot of political pressure on them. They are not being given flexibility with respect to implementing the policy, implementing the various programs, which can become a problem. Why do we need this flexibility? Because you have regional differences. And the one who's implementing on ground would know the best, would know what will be the right way to implement this policy in this society. Then there can be issues with respect to transparency and accountability in working. These can be various issues with respect to the administrators, the ones who are implementing. So the way you're saying that the ones who are implementing should be upright, but more often than not, you'll find that they are on the whims and fancy of the political class. If the political class does not want something to happen, then make sure that the person is either transferred or is not able to function. Right? And you have seen multiple cases with respect to that. So okay, one can be issue with capability, that they are not capable at all. Another issue can be with their intent, that they are corrupt. They do not want to. They do not desire to work in this direction. They are not at all bothered about implementing these programs. And another thing can be political pressure. So you see that you find we can have issues at the end, at the implementation end, about the ones who are implementing it. Then we can have problems with respect to the targeted groups. So what we have done is we basically looked into what are the basic requirements for any policy to be implemented. Then we moved on to problems during implementation. What we are saying is, if you look at implementation, one is you look at the target groups, and the other thing is you look at the ones who are implementing it. So at the implementer's end, you can find that they are not capable, they are not skilled enough to implement it. Then their intent is not right, they're corrupt. There's no transparency in the system. Other thing is that they are working under political pressure and they do not have any kind of flexibility, autonomy with respect to implementing the policy. And also, the third idea is not getting finances in time, not getting adequate finances, and not getting finances in time. Both become a problem. Yes, a particular amount is earmarked for this program, but the center is not releasing it in time. The center is not releasing it in time, which can become a problem in implementation. Just think about it. What we did was, first we looked into the design. What are the various problems related to design at various stages? Then we looked into policy implementation. What is the problem with respect to implementation? But implementation does not end here. One idea is that you just have to go through what are the conditions, desirable conditions for its success. Now, out of the problems, we can understand these conditions. One. Second is, when you are implementing a particular program, it is not that you just go on implementing it without looking at what is happening. So basically, monitor throughout the process. You monitor this policy implementation process. That you look at, we have started this program and it has achieved this goal, or it is not very efficient. There is some problem. But why do we do that? Because the policy framework is finalized. Why do we do that? We do that because at least at the stage of program implementation, we can correct our course. The overall policy framework has been decided, but there is flexibility inside this policy, that the way you want to implement those programs can be changed. So now when we say, like, why do we monitor? We are monitoring to correct course. So please do remember that when you're going for this course correction, it is happening on a program level. It is not happening on a policy level. You cannot now change the policy. You cannot now change the policy which has just been passed out, which has just been designed. Okay, coming back to your condition for success. We say that if these problems are not there, the problems that we have highlighted, if they're not there, we can achieve success. So the program has to be based, because now we're talking about design of the program. The program has to be based on sound assumptions relating to changes in the target group behavior, that how the targeted group is going to accept it, how the targeted group is going to react to this. this program, then if you talk about the design, in the design of a particular program, they should be clear about the specific directions in which you have to move. They should specify the directions, they should specify the roles of various implementers, they should specify the responsibilities, etc. So there should not be any ambiguity with respect to design of these programs. So the policy directives and structures have to be clear and consistent. There should not be any vagueness with respect to that. Then the leaders of the implementation should have proper skills, because we're saying that if they're not skilled, it will become a problem. So they should have proper skill, and also the intent should be right. The intent should be to achieve the goals that have been defined by this program. Then also it should also be supported by various groups. It should be supported by civil society. It should be supported by various arms of your government. How do they support them? One is not interfering, not changing everything very frequently. Another thing is not putting a lot of pressure, so that they have flexibility, they have autonomy in implementation. Then the priority of the objective should not get undermined over a period of time, because this is what happens a lot, that during the implementation part, during the implementation phase, we lose the sight of objectives, that what was the ultimate objective that we wanted to achieve, and we just limit ourselves to that very program, and that is something that should not happen. And also, if you see that you have to take the changes in account, whatever changes are happening should be taken into account. Now think about this, that the targeted group is also changing, because the policy itself, the program itself is having an impact, and basis that your specific goals will need to be changed. And you think about this, your various programs are generally they start with a pilot program in a few states or in a few districts, and then they move on to the rest of the country, but in phases. So there'll always be phases in programs, because they will implement one program, they'll monitor it doing that, and they'll find that these kind of changes can be done. We can go for an alternative course of action. There can be a slight shift in the course of action. And also they keep in mind, they take in account the changes that are happening, because if you have provided something to a particular group, then they would not need it again. That means other areas which have been left behind have to be taken care of. Then on the basis of changes, their demands might evolve, but you do not have to shift the entire focus, because if you stick to a particular section, if you take up, say, this section of the society has to be empowered, and if you stick to that particular section, what will happen is the rest of the society will be left behind. So there can be, say, vulnerable groups in North India and South India. Now you have achieved your statutory goals in the north part of the country, and now you have to move towards the southern part. But what if you forget about the objective of covering the entire country, of achieving, say, education for all, and then you start sticking to or you make a lot of course correction, you make a lot of changes, and you go on targeting the same group? That you'll find will lead to a lot of differences, disparities. And this is also something that you'll find, that we try to apply everything uniformly. One thing, that we do not take into account the differences between various groups, between various regions, between various states. The second thing is, in a few places, it will be implemented perfectly well. So, for example, Swachhata Bharat Abhiyan, it has been implemented brilliantly in a few districts, and those are the districts you'll find on the top. But then also, you'll find there are a lot of districts, maybe it can be your district, where it has not been implemented properly. So there can be various challenges, various issues with respect to that implementation. And one can also be a shift from the objective. So these can be the various conditions for success of any kind of policy implementation. Now, yes, someone is asking that if we talk about your political class not being supportive, why would they do that? If central government has designed that policy, why would they obstruct its functioning? Now, one thing is that you'll find on the basis of your party in power in that particular state, things will happen, a lot of politics will happen around those programs, because you find, for example, wherever there is government formed by the opposition, you find that your health and wellness centers, if you look at implementation of health and wellness centers, you'll find they have not achieved the target. I'm not saying all the states with opposition, but most of them, they have not achieved. Why? Because there'll be a continuous tussle going on between your center and states. And also, you'll find that if the legislature goes on making frequent changes to these programs, then again, a lot of energy goes in, say, preparing the groundwork for one course of action. Then if you change it frequently, then you have to move into other direction, and a lot of resources will be lost there. But now you see, over the years, we have been perfecting the skill of implementing our programs. We are implementing our programs way better than we used to do before. So that has been changed. Yes, we are learning from our experience for that matter. So, yes, okay, let me make this clear. A direct question would not be asked on various stages of policy implementation. Why are we doing this exercise? So that you understand with these stages what can be the issues related, what can be the associated issues at every stage, because that is how you structure it. Now, similarly, the way you do not always have to write political, economic, social, environmental when you write dimensions, because I've shown you questions where you have to follow the same structure, but do not mention it. Without mentioning it, you have to follow the same structure. Similar logic has to apply here. You do not have to remember the stages, but you should know and understand the process. It is a conceptual exercise. It has to be a conceptual exercise rather than factual. You do not have to remember. Okay, so we have looked into the issues with respect to implementation and how we can make it successful. Now, another part of implementation is policy monitoring. What you do is, when you are, say, implementing a particular program, you monitor its progress side by side. You check whether it is being, say, the program that is implemented is being effective or not, whether there is a lot of your cry from the stakeholders, whether there are people or stakeholders who are resisting the implementation. And also, you have to look into the cost-benefit analysis here, that whatever resources we are putting into this program, are they bearing any fruit or not? And monitoring has to be a process. Monitoring has to be a process with respect to anything. For example, now you're studying. Yes, you sit in the class to study, that is perfect. But you have to monitor your performance. You have to write your tests, get them evaluated, and find out whether whatever you're learning is actually bearing fruit or not, so that you can go for course correction. And if you don't write, you would not know what are the problems, and you will not be able to go for course correction. Coming back to this, policy monitoring has to be done during the entire implementation process. It is a subset of implementation process. And I will differentiate it with evaluation, because that is the next stage. You would say that then what is evaluation? What we're saying is we are implementing a particular program, we are monitoring its progress. What is happening? Why do we do that? So that we can go for course correction. That we can make whatever changes are required, so that whatever resources, whatever energy we are putting into is not redundant. Then what can be the issues here? What can be the issues related to policy monitoring? what can be the issues related to policy monitoring. Now think about a program that is being implemented and policy monitoring not being a part of it. They have not given due weightage and importance to policy monitoring. Similarly, in programs will have quantified objectives. A program will say that by this time we'll achieve this. So, open defecation free India by this. Electricity for all by this year, by this month. So they have specific objectives. And now if you say that if you, in the design itself, you have not considered policy monitoring, you have not given due time and weightage to policy monitoring, you have not ensured sufficient funds and resources for policy monitoring, then it can happen. So it can be a flaw with respect to the design of the implementation of the program. Now you can also think about efficiency in monitoring, whether you are doing it to actually find what are the problems and you want to fix it, or you are doing it just for the sake of it. You are not putting your heart in it. You're actually not bothered about the results. So one thing is the issue related to poor design. The second thing is the time also becomes a constraint because of poor design, because they have not accounted for policy monitoring in the design. Then at time you find that there is shortage of corrective actions, because I was mentioning this. Whenever we are saying that yes, we are monitoring a policy, and on the basis of its efficiency, on the basis of whether it is effective or not, we'll go for course correction. But if there is no scope for course correction, the program is so that you do not have any kind of flexibility, you do not have any direction to go. It is a very specific targeted program, and you have to proceed with it. Then what do you do in that case? Just try to answer this. What do you do in that case if you do not have say a proper course corrective measure? But you do that. So incapability of personnel has already been included. At this stage, we are specifically looking into the monitoring part. You can definitely mention it, no problem about it. But let's look at the specific, because it is mentioned here. You will find everything mentioned here. No need to worry about it. But let's try to address the question. If you're saying that you do not have a corrective course, what do you do in that case? Do you go on implementing that program, or what else do you do with respect to this corrective course? Yes, so definitely the effectiveness of the overall policy will become a problem if you do not go for course correction. But what if there is no scope for course correction? Stanley, when we say that there is no scope for course correction, that means we do not have alternative. Do we stop the implementation? Do we keep on going with the same? Okay, now this is more of a tricky question, wherein you do not have a perfect answer to this, because you'll find that there will be at least some scope of corrective action. But generally, what happens is the practical reality is we do not even go for course correction. The monitoring process is so that we do not go for course correction. That is what the problem is. And if there is no course correction, what can a mere bureaucrat do? Yes, they can put in more resources. Say if they can identify a specific problem from there. Because this type of thing can be asked during your interviews. So they can try to look into the specific problems, because it's not that the entire program is flawed. There can be specific problems. So try to identify those problems and work in those directions. For example, if the people are not taking it well, if there is issue with respect to stakeholders, what do? You try to encourage. You try to increase levels of awareness in the stakeholders so that they understand the importance of it, and not that they just accept it, but they also become a part of it. So again, it has more to do with your behavioral aspect, because we cannot go for a change in policy. We cannot, for a mere program, we cannot change the entire policy framework. And at times you see that because we do not have any corrective action, the program that we had started with is not bearing fruit. We also drop the programs. Right? So can anyone give an example of a program that has been dropped in the past because it was not working out, because it was not efficient or effective? Yes, so political class would not. That's what we're saying, that political class does not give a lot of flexibility. Just think of family planning, but the thing is they had pretty much achieved the desired objective. Yes, so generally, if the program is not, say, perfect, it's not working out, they will stop funding. NEP 2020 is not an example of this. National Education Policy, one point is, it is a policy. You have various programs under it. And another thing is, there's nothing like that. You cannot also mention demonetization, because demonetization happened. That happened, and we did not stop it. Whatever was to be done was done. Okay, just think about this. You will definitely find an example. Kirubagar is you're thinking in the right direction. Okay, just think about it. Let's see if you can, because it might not necessarily come from thinking. You might have to search it on the internet. So what we are doing is we were looking at the policy implementation part. What can be the problems with implementation? How we can fix it? Then we talked about the monitoring process. What can be the problems and how we can fix it? Now coming back to our initial structure, what we've done is we have looked into design, we have looked into implementation. Let's come to the evaluation part. Now for evaluation, the first part is we have to look into the outcomes. We have to look into the outcomes. That what has been the outcome so far. Now the policy is has been implemented. Yes, few parts are going on. Implementation is going on in various stages. What you do is you evaluate the entire process. You have to evaluate the entire process. But to evaluate the entire process or the implementation, how do you evaluate it? You look into the policy outcomes. That what kind of outcomes are we getting? Whether there is a considerable change happening in the targeted group, are we able to say empower them? If the idea was to say provide free education to disabled, and the objective would be, or the outcome would be, them getting a better say level of education and awareness, improving the quality of education there. So are we able to achieve that outcome or not? This is what the idea is, and on the basis of this outcome, you evaluate the entire policy. And now when we talk about evaluation, it ranges through the process. Monitoring was specific to your implementation of various programs. So there are, say, 5 programs. Every program was being monitored. Now when we say evaluation, you look at everything, that too in the light of outcome. whether with the implementation of these policy, we have achieved the desired outcome or not. What is the status of outcome? Whether it is actually making, making differences to the targeted group. Now just think about what can be the problems here. What can be the problems here? One thing is we understand the significance. We understand the significance because ultimately it is your outcome which has to be looked into. It is ultimately your outcome which was the objective. So we have to definitely look into the objectives. Okay. So yes, if you look at outcome, absolutely right. There can be biasness. Just think about the agency that is implementing the policy is the one who's evaluating the policy. What would they do? Would they say that we did not do right? Because generally we have a fixation with saying that whatever we are doing is perfectly well. So even our political class follows the same. And you find that whatever policies are there, we find that you generally do not find problems. They do not highlight any kind of problems with respect to implementation. In the evaluation, they say everything is going perfectly well. And even we have, say, overshot the objectives for that matter. So they will always be biased towards showing it to be or portraying it to be very successful. Then what can be the other aspects, other problems related to evaluation? So one is your biasness, that the agency which is implementing the policy is the one evaluating it. So they will obviously be biased. They'll obviously be biased and they'll say that everything is happening perfectly well. Then what can be other issues with respect to evaluation? Now just think about it. Yes, so data can be a problem because if you want to look at the outcome, you have to see that we have to measure the impact. Basically, we have to measure the impact of the policy and the programs. And to see that you would not always have data for everything. Also, it would not be very consistent. So one idea is the evaluator being biased. The other idea is would not find data for this evaluation all the time. So yes, denial of facts. In various reports during evaluation, they deny the facts and they say that there was no flaw with respect to the design and implementation of the policy because the government, the political class, would not accept it as a defeat. Because ultimately, this can become a ground for the opposition to take them down, not just during the discussions in the parliament, but also maybe in the upcoming election. So generally, what happens is the evaluation is not proper, is not complete. It is biased. Now you think about this. What can be other problem? Yeah, so they would not accept their own mistake. Absolutely. So what can be other problems with respect to evaluation? Now what we were saying was that when you look at a policy, we design it, we implement it. During implementation, we also monitor it. Then after implementation, we evaluate it. And this data from evaluation goes into designing the next policy. So the problem is if the evaluation is not correct, one is it does not say give us a clear picture of whether the objectives have been achieved or not. Another thing is if you do not evaluate it properly, think about the policy that is going to come next. Because this policy, the next policy or the new policy is going to take inputs from this evaluation. On the basis of this evaluation, they will determine the problems. On the basis of this evaluation, they'll determine various policy alternatives. And don't you think if the evaluation is not proper, the design of the next policy will also be flawed. And ultimately, the implementation would not help. So we will end up in a vicious cycle of flawed design and implementation of policies. We'll end up in a vicious cycle of flawed design and implementation of a policy. So that is what the problem with evaluation is. Now what we have done is we have looked into various problems, starting from design to implementation to evaluation. You understand all the stages. You not have to remember the names, but you have to remember the process conceptually so that you are able to identify the problem. Because generally the question will be targeted either on design or implementation. And at times they might ask you to evaluate a particular program. But it will generally be focused, and you find that more and more questions have been focused on implementation part. Design has not been put to test for that matter. But you do not have to forget it because the understanding of design will help if they ask a specific question on design. And also the understanding of design will help you either with your introduction or conclusion. It will enrich your content of the answers. Now think of the problems and come up with a solution. As simple as that. What were the problems and what can be the solutions? So think about evaluation. Now, if the same agency is evaluating the progress, they'll be biased. So why not have an independent evaluator? Why not have an independent evaluator? So for example, you have your various councils. For example, for transgenders, you have an independent body which will go on evaluating the various programs and policies of the government. One, they will give inputs to the government with respect to policies, that what are the problems related to say transgenders, what are the problems related to tribals. Everyone has their own body. And on the basis of that, government will formulate policy, they will implement programs, and then this body will evaluate whether the government is going in the right direction or not. Similarly, you always have to take lessons from the past. Look at the previous policy, look at the evaluation of the previous policy. Think about what were the problems and how can they be fixed today? How can they be fixed with the new design? So always take lessons from the past. Now the agencies which are implementing it, we are saying that they are not given enough flexibility and autonomy in implementation. Give them enough flexibility so that they can make changes, they can go for course correction wherever required, and ultimately enhancing the effectiveness of our policies. Similarly, the stakeholders become a problem at the implementation stage a lot of times. So always make sure that you are on the same line, that the government is catering to the demand of the stakeholders. Then you have to spread awareness among stakeholders. You have to make them realize that this is for your betterment. So rather than using a top-down approach, go for bottom-up approach. That means before say finalizing a policy, ask the stakeholders what do they want, what are their problems. So rather than top-down, rather than implementing a policy from there, go bottom to top, bottom-up approach. So including the stakeholders, including your local administration, etc. Then apart from this stakeholder awareness and participation, you find that the stakeholders protest at times that they do not want this policy. What you can do, you can rope in your civil society. Civil society, they can help government implement these programs better because they have roots, they have say grassroots level presence, so they can help in implementation. Also, if you remember from yesterday, they can help with mobilizing people. They can help with spreading awareness amongst people. So role of civil society here. Also, we were saying that at times our administrators and our implementers are not skilled. Go for capacity building in them. At times you do not have sufficient infrastructure, go for that. At times the funds are not released in time, so the financing has to be done in time. Similarly, there should be no obstruction from various arms of the government. And also, you find that at times we were not able to find course correction. We were not able to find course correction. We see that this policy is not working out. It is not effective. But what do? So always use flexible components in planning so that you can have course correction later. If you have flexible components, if not A, let's have A not. A little different. So there should be that flexibility given in the design itself. Right? So these can be the various suggestions to the problems of policy. Yes, Mrityunjay, you can talk about the negative role that government plays at time, because if they find that there is some problem, if they find that they are not being portrayed in a good light, their image is being say spoiled in front of the public, they do take alternative action, they do take political measures which are not right, because ultimately it is to our detriment. And that's why we are emphasizing on the role of civil society, because generally what happens is we have elected our representatives and we forget all about it. We do not care what is happening, because particularly the middle class. The problem with middle class is their problems are related to basic amenities. The problems are limited to your road infrastructure. Your problems are limited to the traffic congestion problem, and we do not look at the larger good, the common good that should be there. And that is the reason we are not able to hold our government accountable. So we find it easy to ignore those issues rather than fix those. Okay, so I hope you can understand these suggestions from this. Yes, so you are suggesting other things as well. That is great. So we had a problem that the design of the implementation of programs was not proper, that the roles and responsibilities were not defined correctly. Correct it. Then at times we were losing sight of the outcomes. We were moving away from the objective, going in a different direction altogether. Fix it. So yes, you can now, with the problems that we have identified, you can come up with suggestions, I believe. So just give a quick thumbs up. Just give a quick thumbs up if you understood this policy implementation and design part, and you will be able to answer a question. Now let's get back to our question that we had mentioned. Let's get back to this question. Now if you have to look at this question, the question says a policy is as good as its implementation. Discuss. See, this is the question. This is the extent of the question. Because I do not think anyone here has gone for the critical analysis of national health policy. I think you're limited to the suggestions that I had given in the class, and no one has cared to. Because if you would have tried to, you would have faced problems. Because you do not have the entire data for implementation. You only have data for a few programs under this policy. And you would have asked the question that I'm not able to answer this. But that's good as well. Why face something when you can ignore it? Ignorance is bliss, right? Okay, so let's get back to our question. A policy is as good as its implementation. Discuss. Now, one thing is, the question says that we have to keep our focus on implementation. We have to keep our focus on implementation. That if the implementation is not right, the policy would not be good. So that is our body. That is fine. Also, looking at the question, you find that we have to come up with a solution, because we are trying to highlight the problems with implementation. So we can come up with suggestions, but those suggestions will be limited to implementation. So we will not be taking into account the problems of design. Similar, so the way we have taken up the issues there in design, that data insufficiency, gaps in data, etc., we do not have to mention them as suggestions here. So suggestions will be limited to implementation. The body will also be limited to implementation. Now, what you have to do in body is that you talk about various problems, how it can lead to poor implementation of a policy, and use examples for that matter. Where do you get these examples? Your current affairs. Because you find a lot of critical analysis of various policies, because the government in its evaluation would say everything is right. There's no problem, absolutely no problem at all. We are working wonders. We are becoming the leaders of the world, so on and so forth, right? Where do you find these examples? In the critical analysis in your newspapers. And that is where you take these examples from. In the introduction part, one idea is you can talk about how it's not just implementation, but design and evaluation, which is also significant. One way. Can you suggest other types of introductions? What can be other introductions? So one way of introducing it is not just implementation, but design and evaluation also are a significant part. What can be other suggestions for an introduction? We can talk about the significance of implementation. Okay. Giving example of earlier failure, that means starting it with a fact. Using an example. Good idea. Definition of policy is a no-no. We do not have to define policy at all in this question. So yes, you can also go for one is fact. You can just mention it as example. So you can maybe give a complete case study in the introduction itself. You can just talk about a policy which failed because of its implementation. Objective, you're writing objective, but objective of what? Significance of implementation is done. Reasons for why we need a policy, no, we don't have to go in that direction, because it has a very limited scope. This question has a very limited scope. Yes, a good policy can fail if implementation is not proper. It's going to be addressed in the body part. Okay, philosophical quotes, again, it's better to stay away from a philosophical quote, because as I already mentioned that, yes, if you remember something you can write, but it has to fit well. One thing. Another thing is you would not possibly remember any quotes while writing these answers, because while writing essays, you have time. You have to write 2 essays. So comparatively, you have more time. If you look at the number of words that you have to write in GS paper in 250 words, and if you compare it with the number of words that you have to write in 250 words for an essay, it is different. So an essay, you have time to conceptualize, you have time for everything. But for a question, you'll get barely 8 minutes, 9 minutes to write an answer. You have to conceptualize and write as well. So writing itself will take close to 7-8 minutes. Right? So you will not have a lot of scope of coming up with new things. So yes, how can we introduce this? We can talk about how design and evaluation of a policy are also significant. Then also we can start with an example. And if we start with an example, make sure that you include the design and evaluation part in this conclusion, just to give a perspective that you talk about the suggestions, how you can make the implementation better. And also that. Yes, so monitoring will be considered here, because monitoring is a part of implementation. So when you highlight the problems here in the body part, if you highlight the problems in the body part, it has to contain monitoring as well. And that's why we went through the entire process. Because if you look at any kind of answers, if you look at any kind of discussion, no one thinks about monitoring, which is an essential part. And this monitoring, even if you write one pointer about monitoring, this is going to give you at least an extra mark, at least 1 mark extra compared to others. So please, that's why we have gone through the entire process. That's why we have taken time. Because now if I say, take up a program of the government, which you do not know. Take up a program of the government, which you do not know, which you are not aware about. and analyze it. Now you can, because you know the basic groundwork, but you do not have to make a lot of assumptions there. You do not have to write the facts that you do not know. Because at times it happens, but generally the schemes that they ask are there in the news. The critical analysis is going on in the newspaper. So, for example, national education policy was in the news, question asked. Similarly, smart city program in paper one, it was there in the news. It was there in the news for a long time. A question was asked. So now, if you see for this year, as already suggested, your cooperatives can be asked. Right, your cooperatives can become a question. Yes, your data protection bill can be asked. So we have to see that now we have the basic groundwork for analyzing any kind of policy, any kind of programs. Yes, so in the body, basically what you have to do is, because it is cause and effect. So if the implementation is good, policy is poor. If the implementation is good, the policy is good. Right? So it is very simple. But you do not have to say apply a lot of logic there. You can write in either way. You highlight a problem of implementation. For instance, if say if you are not monitoring the implementation part, it will lead to a disaster, because you would not be able to understand, you would not be able to look into the effectiveness, efficiency of the policy, and it will work for the detriment. So it basically includes both ideas. Now you do not have to use this concept, but which concept? Because we do not have all the questions like this in your GS paper. We do not have all the questions like this. Questions are not targeting your policy evaluation. Now let's look at this question and we'll take a break. We'll just understand this question. I've given the answer in the next slide. So yes, you can write in paragraph form as well, because it won't be a problem. You can, because the idea is you would have to anyways move in a stepwise manner. So you can write it in a paragraph as well. It should not be a problem. Yes, this is the last class. Okay, so highlight the challenges in implementing gender-sensitive policies in India. Highlight the challenges in implementing gender-sensitive policies in India. So what are these gender-sensitive policies? And also what can be the various challenges? First thing is, you think about these. You have the answer in the next two slides. You have the answer. So you have the idea about how you basically analyze gender-sensitive policy that has been given. And also, I've given the basic pointers which have to come in the body. But to think about this, the reason I've asked this question is that when you look at a policy, you also look from a gender perspective as well. Because there are chances a question can be asked from this direction. They will not ask a direct question like this, but it will be in this direction. Because with the increasing complexity of question over the years, this is just a perspective that you have to take in account, which will ultimately be helpful for your overall understanding. So please go through this question. First, try to understand it, try writing the answer, and then only go through the suggestions that I've given. Not definition, but yes, you can briefly explain what can be gender-sensitive policies. Okay, so with this, let's take a break, and we will meet at 8:10 after the break and continue our discussion on, and we'll take up a couple of vulnerable sections. We'll try to understand the ones which are ideally not covered anywhere. We'll take those up, we'll discuss those, and we'll conclude our discussion. So let's meet again at 8:10. Have to evaluate these mechanisms that have been provided for the vulnerable sections. Welcome back, everyone. Let's start the next part of our discussion, that is various mechanisms for vulnerable sections. Basically, your topic says that we have to evaluate these mechanisms that have been provided for the vulnerable sections. Now, I'll tell you one thing, that whatever commissions you have, whatever policies you have, you should keep an eye on them, and we have looked into pretty much everything. And also, what we have to do is, the commissions that we discuss in polity and governance, you need to remember the problems with those as well, because they might ask you to evaluate those commissions, whether they have been working properly or not. But they are covered there, so we're not going to take them up here. The answer for that question is simple. You at least first try by yourself. At least try by yourself and drop your mail if you're not able to. Because if you try to understand the question, try writing it. Post that, if you look at the answer, you'll be able to understand. There will not be any problem with respect to that. And also about the emails, I might not have been able to reply to a few of your emails, but I'll positively reply by either today, end of the day, or tomorrow morning. Because of the hectic schedule and paucity of time, I've not been able to reply to all the emails. But do not worry, I'll reply positively today or tomorrow. Okay, so the first section that we are going to take up is transgenders. Now, transgenders are generally understood as people whose appearance, behaviors, their personal characteristics do not match the stereotypes that we have of men and women. So a man behaving like a woman, because see, we have an idea. When we say behaving like a woman, it is a stereotype in itself. So a man, say, who doesn't have quote unquote the masculine qualities. Similarly, a female who doesn't have say female like qualities that we generally associate them with. Now the thing is, there are various types of transgenders that you have to see, and we'll come to it. But do not just say limit yourself to the understanding of intersex. So generally in Indian society, we find we have hijras. So do not just limit your understanding to hijras, but it encompasses a lot of other types as well. So the difference between gender and sex has already been highlighted when we're talking about women. So if you talk about sex, it has a biological nature, whereas gender has more of a social connotation. So we'll come to this definition again. Just look at the various types. Now, first thing is, if we think of a woman, we think of everyone as heterosexual. That if it is a woman, they should like men, they should have characteristics that of women, and this is the basic stereotyping that we do. And we have understood gender stereotypes when we are talking about women. Now, this is the third gender. If you remember the Supreme Court judgment, it is the third gender that we have to think in terms of. So generally, our gender identities are limited to male and female, we think in this binary that either a person can be male or female. But there is something beyond that. Another idea is that you do not limit your understanding to either gender or sex. Because what happens is, if you look at the biological construct, we can, on the basis of chromosomes, on the basis of your reproductive organs, we can say whether someone is male or female. But when we talk about gender, when we talk about the quality of a person, that is gender, you see that we also limit it to men and women, but it can be more than that. It is not necessarily, say, matter of sex. It is more a matter of gender. Yes, you do cover intersex here, that will come to, but it is a matter of gender. How do you identify yourself? So this entire discussion will be centered around how a person wants to identify themselves. Should they be able to identify themselves as how they want it? Should they be able to identify themselves against their sexual identity? That is what the question is. Now see, if you think of a woman, we think of them as heterosexual. If you think of a man, you think of them as heterosexual, that they will like the opposite sex. But what if a woman who gets attracted to women, who gets attracted to the same sex, we call them lesbian, a part of gender. Similarly, a man who is attracted to the same sex, who is attracted to a man, we call them gay. Then there can be bisexuals. Bisexual means they are attracted to both the genders. If there's a man who is attracted, who feels attracted to another man and woman, will be considered a bisexual. Similarly, a woman who's attracted to both men and women will be considered bisexual. The ones who get attracted to both the sexes. Then these transgender is basically the encompassing term wherein we say that a person might be born as a male at birth, their sexual identity might be male, but they do not identify themselves with men. Rather, they identify themselves with a woman. Similarly, a woman who is female by birth, by their sex, looking at their sex, but they might not identify themselves as a woman. So transgenders are all those persons whose gender identity differs from their assigned sex. The sex the assigned sex at birth differs from how they identify themselves. Then you have transsexual. Now transsexual, the basic difference is they also do not identify as the same gender. If they're born male, they are not identifying themselves as male. Also, they'll go for a sexual treatment. They'll go for a treatment wherein they permanently change their sex, and those people will be considered transsexuals. Similarly, the queer is the term which covers all these communities, which covers all these types. Then you have questioning, that they do not even know what their gender is. They are in the process of identifying their gender. Then you have intersex, wherein that is where generally you relate hijras. You either relate them to transgenders, that they do not identify themselves as male or female, and then you can identify, or else there are intersex who basically have both say male and female reproductive system, or maybe they have a male reproductive system, they identify as female, and also the male reproductive system is not functional. So those can be termed as intersex. So intersex whose sexual anatomy or chromosomes do not fit with the traditional markers of female and male. So neither they are male nor female sexually. Then you have allies. Ally is anyone who is not a part of this LGBTQ community, but they actively support their cause. They support their cause. They believe in the right of a person to identify themselves to whichever gender they want. And if someone doesn't want to identify themselves, that is also fine. So the allies are those who believe in their cause. Queer is the term that encompasses all these LGBTQ identities. And also, you can just, after the discussion, you can just go through it during the vision, and it is given in a very simple and plain language. Then there are asexuals who do not get attracted to either males or females or transgenders. They do not have any kind of sexual desires for that matter. They can be called asexuals. Then you have pansexuals. Pansexuals means they get attracted to all the types. They get attracted to male, female, and they get attracted to all these different gender identities. So the basic idea is when you look at the transgender community, I don't think there is much to laugh about. This is a matter of the discussion. There's a serious matter that has to be discussed. So I don't think it is something very funny. Yes, there can be a few things that you might not be able to relate to, or say we might not be able to relate to, but that does not make it very funny for that matter. Okay, so now you see that the term transgender, which is called the third gender, encompasses a lot. They have people coming from a community where sex is different. They have both male and female sex components. Then there are people who identify themselves differently. Then there are people who have a different sexual orientation in terms of lesbians, gays, and bisexuals. So it encompasses all, both your sexual and your gender identities. So do not get confused, because there is there are issues with respect to that as well. And do not please limit it just to your transgenders or hijras that you see, because even if you look at hijras, they are not just transgenders, they are intersex as well. So there are intersex people, there are other transgenders who do not identify themselves to this binary of male and female. And now you see, one thing that you have to understand right here is that you have various types, and not every type will have the same problems. Not every type will have the same problems. They can have different problems that they face. But what is to be done is, because anyways, according to your 2011 census, then there are not more than 5 lakh transgenders in a country. Yes, there are questions with respect to that data. We'll come to that. And again, they are a minority community, and we cannot go on splitting them in various parts. But we do have to understand that the differences that are there, because there are people who do not identify as male or female. They're a lot different from people who get attracted to the same sex. So homosexuality is different. Being a transgender, being an intersex is different. So please do remember that it encompasses everything. So you're saying that again, intersex who can bear baby. So generally, the thing is that they have both the reproductive, they have a mix of both the reproductive systems, and generally, it is biologically it is not possible, because you need a complete set of, say, female reproductive system to bear a baby. So generally, it is not possible. So transsexual is they identify to a different gender. That is simple. That being a male, they identify themselves as female. Being a man, someone identifies as a woman. One aspect that is limited to transgender. Now, based on this identity, based on the self-identity, if they go for a treatment, then they change their sex to the desired identity, to the desired sexual identity. So removing the male reproductive system, or say getting a female reproductive system by surgery. It can be done only with surgery. Those are who? Those are transsexuals. So yes, queer is which covers everything, which covers all these different types of transgenders. So yes, one thing that is common is that they all have social stigma attached. But just think about this: if there's a person who's gay, who's primarily attracted to the same sex, and you'll find that they might not even come out. They might not even tell people that they are gay. But then if you look at an intersex, if you look at a transgender, you can identify from a distance that they are different. They do not fit in this male-female binary. So there'll be differences with respect to that. Also, if someone's pansexual, there's no way of finding out. If there's a lesbian, there's no way of finding out unless until they come out. But the question is whether one should be able to identify themselves as how they want, because it is their private life, and why not? And that is what the fight about rights is all for. So what we'll do is we'll look at the various issues related to transgenders. Then we'll look into what are the various provisions, what are the various government initiatives in this regard. And also, I'll share a link for government initiatives from PIB. It has all the initiatives listed in one place. Yes, we have mentioned initiatives here in the PPT as well, but you prefer that document over this because it has all the initiatives and slightly more explained than what you have in the PPT. So yes, so the thing is, the idea is you see that there are a few things that happen on a psychological level, but there are things that are happening on a biological level as well. Because if there's a person right from the birth, and you can find that right from the beginning, they might be identifying themselves as female. There can be something biological. There can be something related to the chromosomes. There can be something related to other biological parts. For example, your intersexes. What about that? So if we are saying that this is a problem, there's a mental issue, and it has to be treated and not promoted, then what about intersex? What about people who have a biological thing? And also, yes, another thing is, okay, let's have this discussion so that we have a fair idea, because the thing is, we have a very limited research on these things. One thing, because it is much later that the society became aware, that the society became conscious about their rights and duties. Then another thing is, one is biology. Another thing is the way someone wants to identify them. And we see, yes, you're right to the extent of saying that they have a lot of, say, they have a high prevalence of mental issues, psychological issues. That the suicide rates are very high compared to the normal population. They are more vulnerable to fall for addiction, any kind of addiction. And generally, you find alcoholism. Then they're more vulnerable to have any kind of psychological issues. Yes, it is there. But can we say that these psychological issues or mental health issues can be because of this social stigma that is attached? Because if someone wants to identify themselves differently, that is their private business. What you do in your private is your private business. It should not concern the society at large, for that matter. One thing. Yes, it can become a problem, that will come to, but also just think about those mental health issues. Because ultimately, the difference between sociology and psychology will attach everything to the human psyche, will attach everything to the individual. They'll say that if there is a problem, it is the individual who's responsible. Whereas if you look at sociology, it will say that the social factors decide what is going to happen. And again, we see that it has to be a mix of both. Because yes, society has influence on us, society influences us to a great extent, but ultimately, we take decisions based on our understanding of it, which comes down to psychology. Again, and if you want a counter argument, think about various sociological concepts. Think about the theory of suicide. There are a few of you might know, which says that your suicides are a social phenomenon. It is because of the social setup. It is because of the society that a person commits suicide. Now, again, this is also a theory which has criticism, which is right to a certain great extent. Then the same goes with psychology, because to understand human psyche is not that simple. So oversimplification of the issue is something that we should not is not desirable, right? Okay, so yes, there can be a thing, because if there is a man who identifies as a woman, don't you think tomorrow, and you have a discussion and debate going around this, they would say that I would want to compete in sports events with girls because I identify as a girl. Similarly, it can be the other way around, and which would not be fair. Then if there's a man who identifies as a woman, and they say that because I identify as a woman, I would want to use a public washroom which is meant for women, don't you think it might be a security concern for the women? So yes, there are problems, but what we have to understand is that, one, we cannot limit the definition of transgenders. We have to include all, because there are people who are identifying as a different gender, and then there are people who have a different sexual orientation. So when you talk about homosexuality, it has to do with sexual orientation, because a man who is primarily attracted to a man does not have the gender issue, does not have the identity issue. They can go on identifying as a man, and they generally prefer identifying as a man, but it is that their sexual orientation is so that they are attracted to man. Yes, so the ones who do not have biological or genetically, say, different sexes, they can also identify, and we have seen that. So transgender is basically the term primarily used for that matter. Now think about the problems. What you would see is that one thing is, look around you, do find any transgender. Yes, you might have, if you're coming from a city, you might know someone who's gay or someone who's lesbian, but talk about the other transgender community, because it includes all. Do you find anyone, for that matter, living in your vicinity, living in your neighborhood? Do you find anyone working with you at your workplace? Do you find anyone studying with you in your classes? And the answer generally is no. That means we are not even inclusive of them within our system. So we'll find discrimination when it comes to education. We'll find discrimination when it comes to residence. People would not be ready to provide them housing. And moreover, you'll find that the family itself does not accept. It starts from the level of a family. That the family is not ready to accept people who identify themselves differently. And you find these kind of issues everywhere in the news, in the movies. So the family is not accepting. They ask them to move out of the house. Where do they go and live? So there'll be problem related to housing. There'll be problem related to their basic needs. Then there'll be problem related to property rights. Family would say that we do not want you in your family. We do not want you to be a part of this family. Go from here. Now they do not have any basic needs taken care of. And what about their property rights? When we talk about property, particularly in India, we say that it is passed intergenerationally. That it is passed on from father to generally son, and so on. So what happens to their property rights? And also, the way we saw laugh react when we were trying to discuss these, the idea is that they get ridiculed everywhere in the society because they look different, they behave differently. And this is what we do. Remember, there might be someone in your class, in your school, early in the childhood. Yes, most of you might have matured now and you would not do such kind of things. But there might be someone in the class now, when you were kids, who must be behaving differently. A girl with that tomboyish girl that you'll find, right? Who walk like, who speak like, who behave like boys. They are generally ridiculed. People will make fun of them. Similarly, if you find, it is not just our society which discriminates, it is our government, it is our administrative structure, it is our administrative system which also discriminates. So there are a lot of cases of police brutality. We do not find any kind of reservation in place with respect to transgenders. And even though you have seen that recently, the policy or the Protection Act was talking about protective measures, positive discrimination, but you do not find it materializing. Why? Because one reason is that it might upset the entire reservation balance, and the transgenders might not form a huge vote bank, which can be a possible reason. Because if you are talking about a policy, if you are coming up with Protection Act, then why would you not go for positive discrimination? When you see that they have been lagging behind in every indicator. You talk about health indicators, you talk about education indicators, they're lagging behind in every indicator for that matter. And also, in terms of numbers, they are a minority. They are socially, economically backward. Now, because they do not have any kind of skills, they do not get proper education, they do not find any kind of gainful employment. You find them living in poverty. You will not find them anywhere living anywhere around you because of the discrimination. They tend to live together. They tend to live together in a particular area. Because generally, even if you ask poorer people who say live in slums, etc., you would not find a lot of them saying that yes, we know where these people live, where transgenders live. And again, keep bringing this again and again. I'll keep bringing this up again and again. So if you talk about gays, lesbians, pansexuals, etc., asexuals, unless until they do not come out, there is no problem at all because they can go on leading a normal life. No one would know. They would have the right to residence, the right to property, etc. But when we're talking about this, you say that the appearance is different. When the appearance is different, that is when it becomes a problem because that is when people would not tend to accept. See, I'm not getting. So you're saying that we have to treat, right? We have to treat them rather than accept someone's identity, rather than accepting gender identity. We have to treat them that there is something fundamentally wrong about their mindset. Yes, people have different views, but if you look at generally what prevails, generally the will of the majority prevails. If you think about various policies that are in place, don't you think they would have consulted enough number of psychologists? Don't you think they would have considered enough number of doctors before moving ahead with that? Don't you think they would have looked at various indicators, various problems? So the mindset has to change, and this is one of the solutions that you'll find, that the mindset has to change. We do not have to try to treat them for the way they identify themselves. The idea is you go for gender affirmative therapies. It is going to be a suggestion there that you affirm their identity, that yes, you can identify as whoever you want. Okay. So generally you'll find them, if you talk about transgenders, you generally find them begging on your red lights, in your buses, in your trains. Then you find them going for performances, various performances during the wedding, after the wedding, at childbirth, etc. And that is their primary source of livelihood. And a lot of them you'll find that are engaged in prostitution. They are sex workers. So these can be various issues related to transgenders. They face hostility, exploitation from the police. They're not accepted by the society. They're not accepted by the family. A lot of them are below the poverty line. In terms of poverty indicators, they're not faring well. In terms of health indicators, you'll find them lagging behind. High prevalence of mental health issues, high prevalence of substance abuse, and particularly alcoholism. Similarly, they're living in poverty. Alcoholism, they generally take to this because this is generally the answer, that because of the social stigma, because of the problem, they take to substance abuse, they take to alcoholism just to get rid of that feeling, just to get rid of that feeling of marginalization. Then because of poverty, it will lead to malnutrition. They will not have awareness. Then high prevalence of HIV. And also if you look, that high prevalence of HIV in transgenders can also be attributed to the fact that the average age, this is out of various surveys, that the average age at which a transgender would have sexual encounter. Now, the sexual encounter need not be voluntary, need not be based in consent. It can be forced as well. And we see that there are high chances of sexual exploitation, and high sexual exploitation happens in high numbers when it comes to transgenders. So the average age of sexual encounter is 15 years, but generally the HIV awareness programs reach after 18 years of age. So it can be attributed to lack of awareness. It can be attributed to your sexual violence, the basic discrimination in providing basic healthcare. So all these ideas about health. Now also there is something called gender affirmative therapy. Now one is, you might not have heard of it. The reason is that we do not have sufficient infrastructure, sufficient people practicing this. Another thing is, this gender affirmative therapy says, rather than thinking that this is a psychological problem, someone identifying as a different gender, rather than this being a problem, this should be affirmed. They should be helped. They should be counseled. They can be undertaken this hormone therapy, which affirms their gender identity, which affirms that this is the gender you want to identify yourself as, and you go for it. Because even if you talk about Supreme Court, when they say that yes, they should be included in other gender, they should be considered as third gender. If you remember 2014, they do think that decisions, yes, it might have flaws, but wouldn't it be informed to a good extent when they're saying this? When they're saying this, wouldn't it be wouldn't it have a good level of information behind it? So rather than, the idea is, rather than thinking just on the basis of sex, think on the basis of gender. That one should be free to identify to whichever gender they want. Okay, consensual means out of their consent. That it is not generally with their consent. It is not only with the consent, but it can be rape as well. We are coming to the various legal provisions for that matter. Yes, so sex education can be a way out. Yes, so forced prostitution can be a reason for high HIV prevalence. See, Manoj, it's not their mindset, because see, one idea is putting it in watertight compartments, they versus us, right? So this is the idea that should take a backseat, that should not be there. And also, it is not their mindset that needs to change. It is our mindset that needs to change. People should be more aware about the issues related to transgenders. People should be aware about various gender identities. And it is not surprising because we find that we do not have any kind of sex education that happens in our country. And that is the reason people are not aware. And generally, we find that all the reports that we quote have a very limited scope, and mostly they're coming from the United States. And maybe a few of you might be, say, going through those. Then there are discussions by Mr. Peterson. Yes, they can be true to a good extent. There's no denying the fact. But the idea is that the mental health issues or the other issues are basically a social construct, because we do not know how to treat our minorities, because we do not know how to accommodate people who have a different identity. Right? So it is a problem with respect to that. Okay, is it not the impact of westernization? The impact of westernization can be understood to an extent that people have become more vocal, people are coming out because of the movement that primarily started in the West. But it is not the problem of identifying yourself to a different gender is not Western. Think about your traditional Indian history. Don't you find transgenders, a mention of transgenders there? Right. So it is not something new. It is not something that the West has introduced in our society. It has been there. There has been prevalence for a long, long time. Yes. So in Ramayana, you have example. Then in Mahabharata, you have example. So there has been presence of transgenders for that matter. So again, when we're talking about these issues, these are primarily related to transgenders. The ones who have a different sex biologically, but they identify as a different gender. Because then there are other categories who might not be facing these kind of issues. Okay. With respect to education, if you look at the indicators, you'll find that the literacy rate is 56% compared to the 74% national average according to 2011 census. Also, the population is 4.88 lakhs according to a 2011 census, but there is a problem. The reason is there was this a social group of transgenders in Delhi, which said that they have close to 30,000 members and they could identify those 30,000 members. But our census data says that in Delhi, this is with respect to Delhi, in Delhi, there are, according to our census in Delhi, according to the community report, according to the census. So you find there is a huge gap. So this can be an error in calculation for that matter. So it is assumed, it is expected that the population is way more than what census 2011 talks about. And if you look at various kinds of discrimination in school, you'll find that they're harassed in the school, they're ridiculed in the school. People do not have any awareness about the different identities, gender identities for that matter. And similarly, you find that they face issues like sexual harassment in the school by your teaching, non-teaching staff. They are not treated equally. They're not treated at par with the other students. And because of this, you will find that they have high dropout rates from school, which is the leading cause of high prevalence of illiteracy in transgenders. And also you'll find that there is this traditional practice wherein if a person is born intersexual, the transgender community will take them. Because another reason of this performance after birth of a child is they go and check. And if it's an intersex, if the child is an intersex, they take them with them. And they're being socialized, they're being trained in their ways of living in isolation, away from the city, away from the normal public. And that is the reason that we do not know a lot about transgenders, because most of it is happening in private, is happening secretly. And also, then there are a lot of students, and you'll find that it is during those middle ages, around 15, 16, around 15 to 18, you'll find a lot of students dropping out, a lot of transgender students dropping out and joining the transgender community in their ways of living. The reason is this discrimination, because they're not able to bear this discrimination. And because of this discrimination, starting from their birth, they find themselves hopeless, they find themselves helpless, which leads to various kind of mental issues. Now, this is real data from Delhi and Uttar Pradesh. You can ignore it. This is just to highlight that with increasing classes, we find that as the standard of education increases, the numbers of transgenders goes down. But it is very limited in scope because it relates to only NCR and Uttar Pradesh. Now, let's talk about the legality of it. You have section. Now, the thing is, now the idea is, we know that they identify differently. We know that there are a lot of homosexuals as well who are attracted to the same sex, because your section 377 and various legal proceedings are with respect to homosexuality. What is that? It is basically having sexual intercourse with the same gender. Because generally it is heterosexual, a man and a woman. But here it is happening with the same gender. That is homosexuality. So your 377, your section 377 of your Indian Penal Code criminalized homosexuality in the past, which has now changed. Now what changes have been brought about? We'll go through a process. We'll go through the process about their legal journey. So in 2009, in the Nas Foundation case, Delhi High Court declared the section 377 and particularly the homosexuality part of it as unconstitutional, and they decriminalized homosexuality. So what your article 377 talks about is, one is having intercourse against the order of nature, because the order of nature says it has to be heterosexual. At least it is considered to be the order of nature, that one has to be heterosexual. Then also they talk about animals, having sexual intercourse with the animals. It criminalizes that. But 2009 Nas Foundation case, they decriminalized homosexuality. So the provision with relation to animal is still there. The provision with the relation to animals is still there. So in 2009, Delhi High Court did that. But in 2013, on the grounds of saying that it is judicial overreach, let the legislature make laws with respect to this. And the decision was overturned by the Supreme Court. And section 377 was reinstated. And this is the process that we would have read in quality. We are just limiting ourselves to the basic understanding. Then in 2017, in Puttaswamy case, Supreme Court had ruled that it is a fundamental right to privacy that is intrinsic to life, that you have a right, fundamental right to do whatever you want in privacy. And also if you go through the judgment, you find mentions about your sexual intercourse as well. That sexual intercourse is also an essential attribute of privacy. Because before that, what is happening? That homosexuality was criminalized. So if the police will find someone involved in any kind of act of homosexuality, they could have taken them and remanded them. But again, the court said that we did not find a lot of cases of people being penalized and being punished for engaging in homosexuality. But that is not the only ground, because in India we find that it is not a lot of cases that get registered. So for instance, there was no case related to rape registered in Haryana a few years ago, and there were very less cases in other places as well. Even though you find that a lot of rape cases are reported in the country. So the number of cases that are there, the number of reports that are there, are not a direct indication of what is happening and what is not. So with that, it paved way to decriminalize homosexuality. And in 2018, in Navteej Singh Johar case, homosexuality was decriminalized. Homosexuality part was removed from section 377. Now, yes, homosexuality has been decriminalized. You can enter into, say, intercourse with the same sex. That is fine. But what about the right to marry? Can you marry someone from the same sex? What about same-sex marriage? Because if you can have sexual intercourse with someone from the same sex, and sexual gratification being one of the important functions of the institution of marriage, what is the idea about same-sex marriage then? Can't we go for same-sex marriage? And you see that in 2018, in Shafin Zan case, SC said that you can choose a partner. Choosing a partner for marrying is a fundamental right. This was in context of your interreligious marriage, that you have a fundamental right to choose the partner you want to live with. It doesn't matter which religion, which caste they come from. And from here on, the idea of same-sex marriage came into picture. That if we have a fundamental right to marry whomever we want, why can't we go for a same-sex marriage? If we are not discriminating on the basis of religion, on the basis of caste, on the basis of society, why are we going on discriminating against gender? So, but this is again the matter of same-sex marriage is in the court. You can expect a judgment anytime soon. So keep yourself open. But again, remember that the issues that we were talking about were related to transgenders. And here, if you see that with respect to transgenders, there was NALSA judgment in 2014, which asked the government to include the idea of other. Wherever in any kind of application you have to mention your gender, you either generally use to find either male or female or man or woman, but they asked the government to introduce other as well, so that people who do not relate themselves, who do not identify themselves with this male-female binary, also have an option. And similarly, they termed the transgenders as third gender. Yes, it is not legalized yet. Yes, it is a debatable topic, that whether people should be allowed or not. Because again, another function of marriage is procreation. Would they be able to procreate? But the argument is they can always adopt. They can go for surrogacy, for that matter, right? So yes, there are various aspects. So Mr. You do not have to remember the number. It was just to give you a fair idea about there can be problems related to data. There can be problems related to data. The government, the census is saying that it is close to 4,500, but the community itself is saying that we have more than 30,000 registered in Delhi itself. So there can be gaps in data. You don't have to remember the number. Just have to know that the number that our census says is close to 5 lakh, but it is expected to the number is expected to be way more than 5 lakh. So now, Transgenders Persons Protection of Right Act 2019. You see that we are talking about various government interventions with respect to transgenders. So one aspect of homosexuality we have looked into. Then you have provisions for transgender people. Now the thing is, your SME sir will share a link here. You just save it, and you can go through all the schemes, all the interventions in one place. If you do not get it, just drop your mail if you're not able to access it. Now look at this Protection Act, which talks about providing protection, uplifting the transgenders, providing them with home, providing them with say housing facilities, skilling them, etc. So it has various aspects related to this. But most importantly, it talks about certificate for identity. Now the idea is that if one wants to identify themselves as a different gender, they are in the right to identify as a different gender, and they completely can. And for that, they have this national portal for transgenders where you can get a certificate of identity. You can get a certificate of identity that I want to identify as a woman, for instance. But if you look at the rules, there are a few problems. So one thing is that the Act talks about welfare measures for transgender persons, but they have not specified anything. And so far, within the framework of this Act, we do not find any kind of reservation for transgenders, which they have been demanding for a long, long time now. Similarly, they have introduced a penalty for making a false application on the portal for transgenders. But the thing is, what are the grounds for rejecting an application, or what are the grounds for being in false application? Because if you're saying you have to identify yourself, what can be wrong in it? Then how can you question that? And also, when you say that the certificate for identity is primarily how you identify yourself, then why do you ask the transgender persons to get a certificate from the local district magistrate? Why do we have to need a psychologist report? A psychologist has to certify that this person is a transgender, this person identifies themselves as say male or men or women or what. But if it is about self-identity, if it is about identifying yourself, then why do you need someone else's certificate for that matter? And also, if you talk about getting a certificate from the local district magistrate, and only if you have been a resident for 1 year, but you find that with the social problem, you find that they go on moving from one place to another. They might not have a proper proof of residence. But yes, the good thing is that these draft rules make it very simple. The national portal for transgenders makes it very simple. The idea is contactless, or you do not have to get in physical contact with any administrative authority to get your certification done, to get your identity certificate. So the big thing, sir, there's a risk of faking identity. Yes, absolutely, it can be. Yes, there can be a risk of faking identity. But even if they're faking the identity, there's no way for a psychologist to find out whether they are doing it or not. Yes, I'm saying that there can be issues arising out of this. But generally, the social stigma that is attached, people would hardly want to identify as other gender, right? Because the kind of social stigma you have attached to this. Now let's look at some other provisions. So under the framework of your Protection Act 2019, you find various things. So they talk about housing facility. For that, you have Garima Greh, which provides shelter to them. Then it talks about providing education. So one is they provide scholarship after 9th standard till your post-graduation, that you can get a scholarship. So transgenders can get a scholarship starting from 9th standard to post-graduation. Then also, under your national education policy, if you remember, we are talking about a gender inclusion fund. And there I mentioned that this gender inclusion fund does not only mean girls, it means transgenders as well. So yes, they are trying to protect their right to education. They're trying to empower them. But again, the question remains, what about the reservation for transgenders? Then also this national portal for transgender persons, wherein they can get this digital certificate and identity card free of cost. And they do not have to get in touch with any kind of any administrative person for that matter to avoid harassment. Then you find you have this SMILE scheme, support for marginalized individuals for livelihood and enterprise. And you have these Garima Grehs under the SMILE scheme, This not only talks about transgenders, it talks about beggars as well, the begging community, talking about provisions for them, talking about providing them skill. And under this smile ecosystem, you have various things. So you have Garima Greh for say providing basic amenities like food, medical care, etc. You get a place to stay and other facilities, and they have a say fixed timetable as well. That what time you'll have recreational activities, what time you'll go for your skilling classes, etc. Then you have PM Daksh Yojana, which talks specifically about skilling, and the skilling that is included here, you have not mentioned here, but skilling is also a part of Garima Greh. So the skilling is done under your PM Daksh scheme, and also you have a centrally sponsored scholarship for school and higher education, ranging from 9th standard to post graduation. So these are various interventions of the government. Now the idea is that yes, government is intervening, trying to make things better, but again there are problems. So what we have done is we have highlighted a few problems with your Protection Act, Transgender Protection Act 2019, and also a few problems related to your national portal. What are the kind of rules that I mentioned there, etc. So but you have to remember that government is working in this direction. What can be the way forward? One is fix these issues with respect to these schemes. Second is sensitize your administration, sensitize your policemen, enforce these protection rights that they have properly, because you find there is no penalty that is mentioned for sexual harassment under the Protection Act. And also if you go to that scheme, if you go to that document that I'll share, you'll find that there are various other, if you look at the provisions, you will be able to identify easily that what is missing, what is there, and what is the problem. Again, so one is to happen on a government level, and another thing, it has to happen on a social level. So introduce sex education, make people more aware. Then other thing is you sensitize people in general, because people are not even aware. People are working with misconceptions. The media should also ensure that they sensitize general public so that there is no discrimination against transgenders. And also similarly, the lacunas of your Transgender Act. So for example, provide reservation, because they're minorities, they are socially and educationally backward, and why not include reservation for them? So the way we have indicators like literacy rate, etc. for educational backward, do we have such indicators for social backwardness? So social backwardness generally will be seen in terms of the access to basic amenities. So it will include healthcare, education, etc. And it will also include the way you are treated. So yes, so we do not have a fixed system, but also they look into the cases of violence against transgenders, etc. But the thing is, let's see if this at all start the process, because then they would have to identify the indicators. Because even among this transgender community, not everyone is as disadvantaged. So let's see if something happens in the future. Right now, the only point of criticism we have is that there are no provisions at all. So gender certification is done. So we cannot mention it as a suggestion because there is already a provision. You have this national portal for transgender persons where you are getting this gender certificate. So yes, the society has to be sensitized at large and also administration. Moving on to, and if you just give me a minute, I'll share that link with you because I think it's not there. I'll just share that link real quick. Just give me 1 minute. When you have all the schemes and government interventions mentioned in one place, because it will be easier for you. You can just keep the document and it will be easier for you. I've left the link in the chat, in the public chat. You can just take it up from here. Okay, so next section is scheduled tribes. Now, the first idea that you have to understand is when we say scheduled tribe, it is a constitutional term. And you deal with your scheduled tribes, National Commission for Scheduled Tribes, etc. in polity. So that is something that you have to relate from there. What are those scheduled tribes? What we will do here is we will talk about tribals. And you would say that there's no difference between scheduled tribes and tribals. But if you see that tribals, for that matter, are not homogeneous. When we say scheduled tribes, you see that we have given them a uniform, a single identity of scheduled tribes. There can be tribes because you see that with notification they can include other tribes as well. But you would see that tribal way of living is different from what the constitutional idea is. So constitutional idea says that these are scheduled tribes. They do not even define what are tribes, right? So it is working on, say, old notion of how to understand who are tribals. So there are a few factors that we need not remember, just understand. Few factors like living in remote areas, living in inaccessible areas, living close to nature, living on subsistence, living, close to the nature, in forests, etc. Having various different practices like community-owned land, not having the concept of private property, etc. So what we will try to understand is we will try to understand who are tribals, what is the tribal diversity that we see in India, and what are the issues related to that. And also, again, remember that these are not a homogeneous group, because what we have to do is you find that we have to reach a conclusion. We have to somewhere draw a line. We cannot just say that they're heterogeneous and how do we identify them? We have to draw a line somewhere. So this is the line that we're going to draw. So they're not homogeneous because you'll find them living in cities, in urban areas. You'll find them living in rural areas. You'll find them living in forests for that matter. So the residents, and again, they're the ones who are nomads, who roam from one place to another. They are also a part of this. They're not homogeneous in the sense that they speak various languages and dialects. Also, if you look at their culture, there are a lot of cultural differences. The way they involve themselves in their art form is different. Then also, you see that they're not homogeneous because of the spread across the country. That we'll see that they are a very diverse group. And also, if you think about, say, religion, a few of them still believe in nature worshipping, very primitive forms of very simplistic ideas of religion. They'll go on worshipping a water body. They'll go on worshipping trees. They'll worship sky. They'll worship someone who is looking at them from the skies, for example. So very simplistic ideas of religion, not having very complex rituals. But also at the same time, you find them to have converted to Hinduism. You find them to have converted to Christianity. Particularly in the Northeast, if you look at Tripura, you'll find most of the tribals have been included into the definition of Hinduism. They are following the practices of Hinduism. And similarly, in states like Nagaland, you'll find most of them following Christianity. Similarly, they have diversity in terms of what kind of economic activity they take up. Some still believe in hunting and gathering. Then there are those who take up agriculture as living. Then there are others who might be involved in weavings. Then there are also those who are involved in industrial work. Then you can also think of people coming from scheduled tribes who are there in the civil services, who are there in government services, who are very well educated, who are lecturers, professors. Right. Again, in terms of say their preference to eat, they're not necessarily non-vegetarian. there are vegetarian tribes as well. Because if someone is living in the forest and you have sufficient produce, if someone is involved in agriculture, you have sufficient produce, you can take up that. And similarly, if you think about distribution, of tribals, you'll find that there are few patches in the country where they are located. So majority of the tribals are located in just central India. Look at these states. So central Indian states comprise of 82%. They actually have 82% of tribal population of the entire country. Then you have northeastern region where you have 12%. Then there are states where you do not have any notified tribes. Can someone give me an example? Can someone, because this is something that you do in polity as well, can someone mention any of the state where you do not find any tribal population according to your notification under 342? Yes, Punjab is one. 0. Goa has a considerable tribal population. So Goa would not come here. Yes, Punjab. Then you have Haryana. Then you have your union territory of Chandigarh. Then you also have Delhi NCR, where you do not find any population. Kerala is not an answer. Kerala has a considerable population of tribals for that matter. Odisha has highest numbers, yes, highest tribal population. Then also within the state, you'll find, if you look at the composition of the state, if you look at the northeastern states, say Nagaland, the tribal population as in proportion of overall population, you'll find more than 90%. And similarly, there are states where it is less. So if you talk about central Indian states, they have tribals, but you'll find as a proportion of the total population of the state, it is not much. Then also in terms of socio-economic indicators, you'll find diversity. For example, there are those who, in terms of say socio-economic development, there are those who are way too developed. Think about the ones who have become a part of our administrative system. Then there are ones who are very primitive. Think about the tribe living in Andaman that you generally find in news. Right. Also, see, Madhu, what you're saying is that yes, there can be tribals in Punjab, but the idea is that there are no indigenous tribes there. These people have been accounted to the population of the source state, because if you talk about a tribe, there are nomadic tribes as well. They go on moving from one place to another, right? So these are a few features of tribals, and also if you think in terms of their culture, it is different. If you remember, when we were talking about exceptions with respect to patriarchy, with respect to patrilineal families, patrilocal families, the only examples that you could find was that from tribes. If you remember, Garos and Khasi. So they have a different way of living. Again, you'll find most of them involved in they limited their economic activity to subsistence. That means they produce as much as they can consume. They do not rush behind surplus. They do not believe in the market norms. Yes, you'll find barter within various tribal communities. Then also most of them rely on subsistence. And that means they know, they have the idea of what is enough. They know that this is all that they need. Also, they believe in community living. They have very strong kinship bonds. They are very attached to the clan that they belong to. Then also, a lot of tribes do not have a concept of private property. It is community-owned property. The way we say in communism that you do not have private, so abolish the right to private property and let there be community land. So it will be like people from the same tribe are cultivating a big patch of land rather than say splitting it into private property. They cultivate the entire land together for that matter. But again, what I'm going to repeat is that there is no uniformity for that matter. They are a very diverse group. They have diversity more than what we have in the general population. So yes, there are few features on the basis of which you can identify whether someone is a tribal or not. And this is given with respect to the population, the proportion in the states. Now, what are the issues? Now, we are saying that they stay close to the forest, they stay close to the nature. But when you reserve the forest, you infringe on their rights. If they are living in forest and they're inhabiting forest for the sake of resources, think of your central India. For the sake of resources, a lot of them have been displaced. So they'll find the problem of land alienation. Then you find that there are a lot of, previously we said that they are living in inaccessible regions. They're living in regions where normal public cannot access. But you find with the growing spread of the road infrastructure, and which was started by the Britishers, of course, we find that now they are in touch with the general population, and because of which they face competition in terms of resources with the general population. Then similarly, they have been exploited because if you remember your tribal movements, you find that they were fighting primarily for the right to livelihood. They're fighting primarily for keeping their forests with them, because again, if they believe in subsistence, if they know the idea of enough, if they understand what is enough, they will be involved in subsistence, in sustainable development. They'll use their resources very sustainably. But then Britishers took it away, so they started protesting. They joined the mainstream your freedom movement, and the idea was that once the Britishers are ousted, once the Britishers are gone, we will get our tribal rights back, we will get our forests back, and we will go back to normal way of living. But that did not happen, and that's why you find that the struggle has been continuing over the years. It had started during the British times, but it has continued because even the Indian government went on with the same policy of development for all. So in the process of chasing development, we disturbed their setup. We disturbed the ecosystem of tribals. Think about with all the pollution, with all the environmental pollution, because of land degradation, because of cutting down forests, because of deforestation. The ones who were living primarily in the forest, how can they survive there? So similarly, they have other issues related to agriculture. Now, with agriculture, they generally believe in subsistence agriculture. They do not have the means. They got alienated from their land. They became a source of exploitation by the money lenders, and their land got alienated. That means their land got stolen from them. Then they do not have the means to get proper credit, and that's how you find a lot of landless laborers, a lot of tribals working as landless laborers across the country. And then also you find that with not having the right source of livelihood, it gives them another reason to travel to other places. So a lot of tribes became nomadic because of this reason, because they were not able to find resources for their subsistence. Then the forests have also been reserved. There are limitations on them. They cannot, because previously they were getting some produce enough for their daily requirements and letting the forest be. But now the forests have been reserved and there's no trespassing for that matter. So it will impact the basic survival, etc. And also the problem related to displacement, because I have given a small case study there as well, that a lot of people who got displaced during your Upper Indravati project were mostly tribals. Similarly, in your Koil Karo project of Bihar, 88% were again tribals. So they get displaced in huge numbers because they are the ones primarily inhabiting those regions. Those people are either generally living in rural or urban areas, but it is primarily those forested areas, it is primarily that unutilized land that is being used for development. So they are the ones who get displaced in the process. When if you look at the levels of education, you'll find that the population is close to 10%, not even 10%. If you talk about scheduled tribe, it is not even 10% of the total population. And out of that 10%, you'll find that most of the tribals are illiterate. They do not have the right levels of education. Also, if you look at our curriculum, do we take into account the specific demands of tribals? Do we have any kind of teachers who can teach them in their own language, in their mother tongue? No. Generally, we have a uniform curriculum across the state, and everyone has to read the same. And also, the culture is different, their ideas are different, the norms are different, and the regular uniform education that we impose does not fit into their criteria. They feel disconnected. Similarly, if you talk about health, they face challenges with respect to health because they are living in remote areas. They do not have the right means. They believe in subsistence. So you'll find that the life expectancy ratio is low compared to general population. Now comes your idea of how your constitution identifies these tribals. They identify in the form of scheduled tribes. Your Article 366 talks about scheduled tribes under Article 342, which are specified by the president. But yes, the parliament can make laws to include or exclude someone from the list of this scheduled tribe. So this is the constitutional idea of scheduled tribes. So when you say scheduled tribes, yes, it includes tribals, but they are not same terms. So tribals is a more comprehensive term. Now we see that there are various issues arising out of the development strategy of our country, because we say that we have to develop all, but why do we have uniform goals of development for everyone? Because the idea of development for you, the idea of development for me can be different. So why is it not section specific? Why is it not taking in account the demands, the needs of the people or of the targeted group? So in this respect, there was this policy of Panchsheel propounded by Pandit Nehru, wherein it talks about, it has 5 principles. That's why Panchsheel. So it talks about 5 principles that let people develop along their lines of own genius. Let it be their own idea of development. If they are skilled in weaving, let them develop themselves in that regard. Then also, the tribal rights in land and forest should be respected. That yes, they might not have a certificate for a private property because they do not believe in private property. It is community owned property, and for the simple reason that they do not have the registration of land, etc. You cannot go on displacing them. So you have to take those considerations in account. Similarly, we should try to train and build a team of their own people, because they'll be the ones who will be able to communicate the ideas better. Train someone from who's one of their own, because they feel connected to them. They speak the same language. They'll have the same ideas, and include them in the administration of those tribal areas, rather than sending someone, because this is another problem. If you talk about the relationship of tribals with foreigners, anyone who does not belong to their community, it is not very peaceful. It has not been very great, right? So rather than imposing a foreign administration, because that is how they perceive it, let it be from within. Go for training people from their own community. Then do not over-administer these areas, and do not say overwhelm them with the multiplicity of schemes. Do not have a lot of schemes for them, because they do not. Their idea of development is different from what your idea is, and do not go on over-administering. Do not step into each and every domain of their regular life. Then do not judge the results only by statistics or the amount that you spend. Look at the outcome. What is the outcome? Whether they are able to develop their human potential or not. So do not just look into what amount of money has gone into it, what are the various statistics. Look into whether what kind of outcome have we achieved. This was the idea of Panchsheel. Now what you have to do with respect to this is your tribals, and so you have your scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, women, children, elderly. Then you have your transgenders, minorities. Now you have commissions for pretty much everyone. You understand the problems, because women, elderly we have covered, and also children to a certain extent, at least the health and education has been covered. Then you find that your minorities are covered in polity, transgenders and scheduled tribes having covered here, and to a great extent they're covered there as well. So at least the constitutional legal provisions are covered there. Then your SCs are also covered with polity. Now what you have to do is you consolidate everything. You should know what kind of schemes are there. The way I've shared this policy document with you, the document which covers all the kinds of government intervention, you should have for this. Do not rely on the complete document, just take crisp notes out of it. So it is going to be very factual for that matter, but along with factual details, you have various issues or the part of critical analysis with respect to those government interventions. So for example, problems related to NCST, problems related to National Commission of Women. So those things which have been covered there in polity, please do take notes of those and consolidate everything in one day, so that you do not have to use multiple sources for that matter. So this was with respect to your various schemes, how you have to analyze the design, implementation, etc. And then we looked into a couple of our vulnerable sections. Now let's look at a few questions. Let's look at them quickly because it's about time. Now a few of them might have already been covered. What we'll do is we would not discuss the body part. We would not discuss the pointers in body. Let's see how we can approach this question, how we can structure this question. So look at poverty in India is not merely an economic phenomenon, but also a social one. So the question says that it is not only an economic phenomenon, but also a social one. So what we have to do is, there are 2 ways of doing it, because it is not, the instructions are not very clear. So what you have to do is use the introduction to mention how it is an economic phenomenon. Use your body to write how it is a social phenomenon. Yes, it was there in the weekly test, so that's why we are discussing. And great, finally someone could identify a question from the weekly test. Congratulations to me that at last someone is writing the weekly test. Okay, then in the conclusion, yes, you can definitely come up with suggestions. Right. And also in the introduction, give more weightage to economic dimension, but also mention the other aspects. If you remember the idea of poverty from there, how it is a multi-dimensional concept, you talk about other dimensions briefly. But your majority, your body has to stick to how it is a social phenomenon. How it is a social phenomenon, think about the various social factors that can cause poverty. If you remember in your slides as well, you have cause and effect relationship under the, towards the end of the PPT, you have cause and effect relationship. We were talking in terms of vicious cycle. So social factors, like it happens on a social level because of discrimination in education, health, etc. So those things can be directly linked here. Social phenomena, yes, so because of a caste system, etc. Yes, so feminization of poverty. right? So you can structure this question in this way. And okay, so Madhav, just compare the way you had written the answer and maybe the way that I have suggested. And what you can do is, with the new instructions, you can try writing that question again, writing the answer again, and send it across again, and see whether you have improved or not. Then collaboration between the public and private sectors, along with a suitable regulatory framework, can help create a balanced healthcare ecosystem that addresses the diverse needs of the Indian population. And we have to critically analyze. Now look at this question. It talks about the collaboration between the public and private sector. Your health policy also talks about collaboration between the public and private sector. It also talks about how you can have, if you remember the suggestions, we were talking about having a suitable regulatory framework, and you have those pointers, if you remember, towards the end, had given you those dimensions. From there, you can think about suitable regulatory framework. But rather than going and looking at it, try to conceptualize it on your own, that what can be that suitable regulatory framework. And what you have to do is how that can address the problem of, address the diverse needs of Indian population. What are the diverse needs? Diverse needs in the form of various sections of the society. So your elderly, children, etc., women, transgender, now that you have transgender, add that as well. So diverse needs in that form, and also diverse needs in the form of levels of healthcare. That in your rural areas, or you need primary healthcare for all, then you should have a rigid tertiary healthcare system, etc. And also what you have to do is that you have to think of the problems related to privatization, because even though it does not specifically talk about privatization, but it is directed in that it is in the same direction. So what you have to think about is what are the problems related to privatization, and that's how you can critically analyze it. And once you're done doing that, you can conclude it on a positive note, that how we can, and you can definitely mention about your national health policy, which talks about the same, what can be various suggestions. Coming back to it, yes, so diverse needs of access, affordability, and quality as well. Great. So now what you have to do is you do not have to merely mention these. What you have to do is you have to try to explain that how this collaboration can address these problems, can address these diverse needs. So I hope you'll be able to do it. That you can increase access with increased public expenditure. You can increase quality with involvement of private sector. Right. So I hope you will be able to do it, and we have discussed this in greater detail during our discussions on health. Next question: what role does media play in perpetuating gender bias and affecting the sex ratio in India? What role does media play in perpetuating gender bias and affecting the sex ratio in India? Think about various factors. Can you suggest what are various factors and what are various manifestations of gender bias with respect to media? Think about this. Think about this question. This is a good question because role of media and status of women club together. So objectification of women, and see, now I'll tell you about the way you have to approach this. But the thing is, you would not have sufficient content for this, and I had deliberately kept it for 250 words. The reason is because there'll be a lot of questions that you'll find in the examination where you would not have sufficient number of points. So the basic idea behind this question is go for paragraph format of writing. So one way is to address the challenge of maintaining these 250 words is go for paragraph-based writing. One, second, include a lot of examples. Include a lot of examples from your various advertisements, right? And it is not just your media, that is your mass media, it is your social media, etc. as well. So think about the way women are objectified. Think about the way we are giving more and more push towards various ideas of gender stereotypes. That this is how things are supposed to be. Then you can think of various Indian and international movies which reinforce these gender stereotypes. So yes, Big Fat Indian Wedding. And you can think about these beauty pageants. That it is your physical appearance that matters rather than anything else. It is your physical appearance that matters. So the professions like modeling, acting, etc., wherein women get out with age, either they have to maintain those levels of fitness, which is not possible after a certain age. Then because of that idea, because of that stereotype, they go for surgeries, etc. And ultimately they go out of profession. They go out of work. They run out of work because their work is related to their physical appearance, which goes on dying down over the years. Yes, so that's another part. The other part is how can it affect the sex ratio in India? Can anyone try to answer the other part of this question? How can it affect the sex ratio in India? Think about it, because it is more indirect. Yes, so you have to talk about social media and everything. You have to talk about social media and everything. So yes, Mrityunjay has highlighted something good. So you have news regarding crime, and which might make parents feel that if he had a girl, she would not be very safe in the society. Great. Yes, sensitizing female infanticide, the various cases of rapes that come into news. Great. So I hope now you understand. Now the thing is, you do not have sufficient pointers to write in a point-wise format. What you have to do is, you try to write this in paragraph format, wherein one paragraph can be dedicated to gender bias and the other one can be how it can be linked to sex ratio. And also try to use more and more examples to heed to this word limit. So try to expand your answer using examples, because for that you need examples. And social media and media is something that we go through on a regular basis. So yes, glorifying male dominance in the society, violence against women in matters of war, etc. Right? Issues related to safety of women, etc. Because these are being highlighted in the media, and which leads to a perception that women are not safe in this country. That's what it is. So what you have to do is, first intro, you can talk about, apart from media, what are other factors which play a role in perpetuating gender bias in the society. You can think of various others coming from your social institutions. Then in the body, you divide it into 3 paragraphs and write these factors that we have written with a lot of examples. And then you can conclude on a positive note that how can media fix this? What kind of suggestions we can have to fix this problem? And also you have to include in the one is suggestion, and in this suggestion, what you can do is you can smartly include the role of media in fixing this issue, because the alternate perspective says no, it does not play a role in perpetuating gender bias. So what you can do is, in conclusion, one is you have to anyways end on a positive note. So you write a suggestion, and this suggestion can be directed towards the role of media in stopping this gender bias. That how media can spread awareness, can help people come out of this problem, or can stop itself from perpetuating this gender bias. Yeah, so just think about it and write it, and you will be able to answer the question. Now, caste and class are 2 different forms of social stratification, but they have been often found to overlap with each other. Example: Now, this is a question I think we have directly discussed in the class, and I have mistakenly included this here. So if you remember, we are talking about how the class system is giving way to the class system, and also we talked about how we have a class system, how the class system is the basis of a class system, and then you can compare various aspects like mobility. Because if you want to find overlaps, you can also think about mobility. You can think about the data from the census, 2011 census that are given. Yes, okay, perfect. We have discussed this, so let's not get into this again. Let's not get into that question again. Now, the other question is, poverty is the single biggest challenge in the face of health and education in India. Critically analyze. So if you want to critically analyze this statement, what we have to do is, one idea is yes it is, and the other idea is no it is not, which have to be given equal weightage. Then the other thing is, what happens to the introduction? What do you do in introduction? In the introduction, you can, okay, so when you say no, sorry, first take yes first. So when you say yes, poverty is the single biggest challenge in the face of health and education in India, what do? You go with those vicious cycles with respect to health and education. I hope you remember those vicious cycles. Mother, we can wait just 5 minutes and we'll conclude the discussion, and maybe you can just check the last 5-10 minutes afterwards through recording. So you remember those vicious cycles, those come. Then if you want to say no, then you think that how health and education would not be the biggest challenge to poverty. How health and education would not be a biggest challenge to poverty. Now there are two things. Think about, one idea is health and education being the biggest challenge. Second idea is them not being the biggest challenge. So here it will cover that how there can still be poverty, even though there can still be issues related to health and education, even though we fix poverty. There will still be challenges. Even if we fix the thing of poverty, because it is not just say yes, so if you do not have employment, or no, we have fixed the thing of poverty. Think about other factors which can affect health and education, the quality of healthcare, the access to healthcare, the quality of education, the quality of your teachers, etc. Those pointers, right? And also what you see is, what you have to think about is a conclusion. Now conclusion can be fairly simple, wherein you address these problems. Conclusion is simple, you address these problems with the way forward. But come to intro. Now intro can be slightly tricky here. One idea is you highlight what are the various challenges. What are the various challenges to health and education in India apart from poverty? One idea is other challenges. Another idea is use some facts or stats that how poverty is related to education and healthcare. No, you do not have to write yes or no anywhere. That yes and no is happening in your head. You just have to dedicate different paragraphs or different parts of the answer to these. No need to write Amartya Sen's definition of poverty because it is not directly asked in the question. So you can think about linkages between the same. You can also highlight the linkages between health, education, and poverty, the tri-circle. Right, so that can be one way. Second way can be how poverty, use some facts to show that poverty, how poverty impacts health. You talk about out-of-pocket expenditure. You talk about dropping the higher dropout rates in our education because of children involved in child labor. Right, so you can use some facts, some stats, or some arguments in the introduction. And also you can mention other challenges. Now there is this other question which talks about the legitimacy and accountability of self-help groups, and the microfinance outfits need systematic assessment and scrutiny for the sustained success of the concept. Now this is directed towards the problem of these self-help groups not being able to fulfill the objective and breaking down in the process. So we have to address this, and we have to address them in the light of the issues related to legitimacy and accountability of these self-help groups. So I've given a basic structure here. What are the issues related to legitimacy and accountability? These are informal groups. They need not always be registered. Simply, they also have access of any kind of accountability mechanism because there is no monitoring that is going on. Then why is there a need for systematic assessment and scrutiny? And you highlight the problems there. So I hope this is a previous year question, and again a fairly simple at that. Then also what you have to do is look at this question about your centrally sponsored schemes and how to make them effective. So the first idea is you understand what are centrally sponsored schemes. Talk about that briefly. Then you highlight a few issues related to centrally sponsored schemes and straight away jump into the suggestions that I mentioned here. So what I want you to do is just look at this question, do not look at the answer, and try to conceptualize this. What can be the problems related to centrally sponsored schemes? The center is giving money to the states and expecting to have a uniform impact. Right? There might not even be a problem of that state. Then it can be related to funds, etc. So I would want you to break it down yourself and do it. Even ultimately, the answer has been provided here. It is not a problem. Answer is provided here. But before looking at the answer, you try to answer it yourself. Try to conceptualize yourself. This is my email ID, and you can drop me a mail in case you have any questions or suggestions or doubts, and we'll try to address all your problems and questions. So with this, we conclude our discussion on social issues and justice. It has been say wonderful time with you guys, with all the engagement that you did, with all the learning that you might have happened, and I hope everyone had something to learn from this. And please do try to write answers, because ultimately, if you do not write answers, all the logical understanding that we have evolved in this discussion on 13 days would go in vain, because I'd not like it to be a one-way session or a one-way discussion, because ultimately learning, and the way your national education policy says that learning takes a backseat, then it becomes very mechanical. So the idea was to involve more and more of you in these discussions, and I hope it had a good impact on you and you have learned a lot. So this, let's conclude our discussion, and we will meet up in future. Let's see when do we get time to meet again. And thank you everyone. Have a good day.